This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and this is a listener call-in part 2. I think we're going to have a part 3 as well coming up for February. I've recorded 6 calls today, and I've got another load of them planned in for tomorrow as well. I've gone all around the globe. I've got the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand, China, all on this call, talking UFOs, academic programs, orb sightings, really up close and personal sightings, and all kinds of different experiences as well, including one listener putting me on the spot with a few questions for me too. Some of those will bleed into part 3 as well, including some of the calls still to be recorded, but very excited for you to listen to these. If you haven't listened to the listener call-in before, do give it a chance. You're going to hear a lot of really interesting stuff, and it's a format lots of people are getting more and more fond of as well. As always, if you want to get in touch to share one of your stories, ask a question, or just even share some opinions, email ufouapam@gmail.com. Link is in the description. There are loads of interviews planned for the rest of the month, folks. I've locked in dates with about 7 guests now, and in the coming days I'll release the names and dates for those as well. But just lots of availability wasn't there till mid to late February. So a couple of listener call-ins and a breakdown type show coming this week at least, and I look forward to speaking to you all very soon. Let's get straight in with the first call. Joining me on the line in North Carolina, I've got Luke. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Andy. Glad to be here.
Very good to have you. Luke, the floor is yours. What do you want to talk about?
So, in the last, especially in the last year, after the events of last year, I've wanted to get more involved in some way or another. It's kind of like just like a gut feeling that I've had, and I've had this for many years, but I've not really known the inroad. And for a while, things felt kind of tame in the UFO world, but especially after last year, I just gotten kind of like fired up and feeling like I want to participate in conversations and do something more actively. But I've not really known where to throw out a line, basically. I mean, there are lots of UFO podcasts. So I could always throw my hat into that ring, but
absolutely.
Right. But so the idea that has come to me is the graduate program that I'm a part of, which is European based. It's called GCAS, Global Center for Advanced Studies. That's where I'm doing my doctoral dissertation, and it's basically a angle on consciousness and quantum theories of mind vis-a-vis kind of continental philosophy. But I was speaking to my dean about, because I've been kind of putting it in his ear and in my advisor's ear, like, hey, you guys might want to like pay attention to this whole UAP thing. Like it might be, on the horizon as far as of interest. And I think there's going to be a demand for academia. And so the idea has come about to create a graduate program in UAP studies. But as I was explaining to you, at least so far, I've only put out a few feelers, and maybe I was shooting too high, but the emails that I've sent to people, it was like, I mean, I've sent out probably 8 or maybe 10 different messages to people, and I haven't heard back from a single person yet. As far as people who are known in the field, and we would be looking for people to give, virtual lectures, give a course. But I mean, imagine like Richard Dolan giving a 3-semester course on his UFOs in the national security state. Imagine how amazing that would be to legitimately go through those texts like textbook, and and what kind of, in designing it, I'm asking questions like, in what ways would a graduate need to be prepared? But one of those things is to really understand the history of documents, government documents, and what we know about the national security state in conjunction with the UAP issue.
Okay, so interesting. First off, I'm an idiot. Okay, so I hear people throw about the word like quantum, for example, in a lot of ways, and I'm probably one of those guys that uses it in the wrong way, like Ant-Man, Quantumania. What does it does
Yeah,
it mean?
man.
Does it mean small, really small? Does it mean big, or everything in between? So explain to me in layman's terms, because no doubt someone else will be out there listening to this, thinking, okay, this guy's into UFOs. He's an academic, he's studying at a very serious level, and he's got a pretty serious idea. But what is it you actually do if you're telling me, who's a complete layman, at an academic level, and then how does that relate to UFOs?
So the way that I see that connection, I'll probably butcher this, but like, just starting on the academic side. So my dissertation will basically, my starting point is actually a living philosopher named Giorgio Agamben. He's a post Heideggerian kind of post-structuralist. So that's in the continental tradition, which is different from the kind of Anglo-American analytic philosophy. And his understanding of language is something that's kind of enchanted me for a very long time. And I've just had this strong intuition that there's something kind of essential about human nature that he's tapped into. And um, and in order to model and formalize his theory of language, I'm basically implementing and importing quantum theory. And so quantum theory is, I mean, that is a very, very broad term because we can talk about quantum field theory, we can talk about quantum physics, we can talk about quantum computing, but we can talk about quantum logic. So really what quantum theory in the broadest sense really has to do with a mathematical formalism rooted in linear algebra. And utilizing that formalism is the only way that we're able to make sense, but in a non-deterministic, non-causal way of quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics does not give us an exact cause and effect because of the collapse of the wave function. You just end up with probabilities, but it is linear algebra that allows us to make sense of the probabilities in the way that they distribute. And so that's where the quantum theory comes in. For me, is largely going to be from a mathematical formalism, and so like I'll be looking into quantum computing, or I have been, and utilizing some of that to model some of what's going on in Giorgio Agamben's philosophy. But then, of course, the deeper extrapolation from that, which gets into more stuff like Roger Penrose, or there's an adjacent theory from the Penrose-Hameroff model, which is called quantum brain dynamics. And those do arrive at some sort of version of the brain is actually a quantum computer.
Yeah.
But of course, but there's a deeper physical implication that maybe consciousness has some sort of innately quantum is fundamentally quantum in some way that is very mysterious and certainly very tantalizing. And what does this have to do with UAP? Well, I don't really know, other than that when you see kind of the terrain of the issue of UAP, you get these kind of injections of quantum theory, and the main ones where you hear it are things like are the speculative technologies. Okay. And so that can be just have to do with the actual hardware, the holes of the ship and the metamaterials and all that. But of course, then we get the whole idea of, you have to wear this helmet, and that's how the steering system is
with it that way.
right, exactly, has something to do with consciousness, and well, maybe then there's a quantum dimension to that, sure enough. But then the other thing is the kind of high strangeness side. And so I've long since had an intuition that when it comes to paranormal phenomenon, there is some sort of, maybe there's something that quantum mechanics or the quantum model could give us in order to be able to think about these these phenomenon in cogent ways. And sure enough, there are some I think it was one of, I can't, the name's escaping me, but there's a guy who was a friend with Edgar Mitchell, and he co-founded. It was not the Noetic Institute; it was another one that Edgar Mitchell did, and he utilized and kind of expanded on um, Edgar Mitchell's theory of consciousness. And the guy's name is Ray something. It's a Hispanic last name, Rey. He had a pretty wild paranormal experience. I think it was involving like orbs or something like that, involving his wife, and that's what got him into it. But before that, he was just like a straight laced kind of like scientist or
Was
whatever.
Ray Hernandez?
That's exactly it. Yeah. And so he utilizes quantum theory is part of his whole kind of formalism in how to begin to think about and make sense of what we think of as supernatural or paranormal effects. So those are some of the kind of touchstones for me as far as like how it might relate.
So if I'm understanding it, if this kind of thing got off the ground, you'd be hoping folks with a real serious, high-level academic, thirst for knowledge, they're going through PhDs, master's programs, all that kind of stuff, would gravitate to a course like this that would take a very particular skill set, not to sound like Liam Neeson, and start to move it towards the UFO, UAP side of things to get them thinking about it in a way that's not happening right now.
Basically, so a lot of what I was elucidating was kind of like my dissertation piece, but the point is when we talk about UAP as a topic, it's basically a constellation of ideas, and it's not really a well-defined. It's not like biology where we know what our object to study is. UAP is
100%,
much more of a constellation, and so to me, it's like if someone were to graduate from a master's in UAP studies, what might they be equipped with? Well, they certainly should have an understanding of the history of the relationship with the national security state and all of that, and really understand the FOIA documentation and other documents that we've gotten over the years to understand that, like, well, it seems like there points to something being going on, but then also, wouldn't it be really cool to have, kind of a speculative technology or speculative science where it is grounded. It's the name speculative's in there. We don't know yet, but to think that Jack Sarfati or Salvador Pais,
I knew that.
or Salvador Pais, think that they don't have salient ideas. They're actually rooted in established theory is wrong. It's just that we haven't put them to the test, so we don't know yet what the right one might be, but they're certainly worth thinking through. And then the idea being that you kind of have a program where you get introduced to a constellation of ideas at a high level and in a serious way, but then is helping people, academics particularly, to begin to think about these issues and have meaningful and like high level resources at their fingertips, to have people who think at that same level kind of in their network, and then can begin actually maybe putting out like legitimate academic papers and starting to just contribute to. It's like what Soul's trying to do in some ways, except that instead of just having a landing place for like a conference where if you come up with a good paper you can go present there, it's like, well, what are we feeding out into academia? And so far, I mean, I know Danny Sheehan is like doing some sort of academic thing too, I think, trying to put together some classes and stuff. But
Danny Sheehan's doing everything.
I know, he is doing everything. He really is doing everything.
Yeah, I don't know if he's spreading himself very thinly or if he's just got that much time. But first off, I love the phrase "constellation of ideas." That's what I'm going to steal to use in everyday life going forward. Saul, as you were talking, I was writing down some stuff, and Saul was one of the first things I put down. Did you apply for tickets to the last Saul symposium? I think they were calling it.
I didn't know you could.
Yeah, it was an online registration, and I believe they're aiming to do one again this year about the same time. I would first off definitely keep an eye on that, because that sounds like the kind of stuff they'd be quite interested in speaking with. And in terms of the kind of thing you're talking about, again, as someone who's far from an expert, if you're going to get something like that off the ground or get folks involved, that would be a hell of a place to start, actually getting face to face. You're at the table with those types of folks that you want to be speaking to. I like the idea, though, of reaching out to some of these folks. And I don't know if you want to mention, but who have you emailed? I know you've not heard back yet, but some of the names.
And again, maybe I was just shooting too high, but I was, some of that was strategic, hoping that, like the first person I emailed was Diana Pasolka. I mean, she's over in Wilmington. She's very close by.
Yep.
And I kind of hoped, well, maybe if she, drew interest, then I could, drop her name for other emails or something. But Pasolka, Richard Dolan, I just went for it with Barry Nolan. He's just got his email on his, but it's his lab. But
I wouldn't take it personally that Gary Nolan's
no,
not got that yet. That,
he seems like a pretty busy guy.
yeah.
Well, it was funny because I emailed Pasolka, and then like 2 days later, I found out, oh, she was on Joe Rogan that night. Like on like the day that I sent her the email.
I think she had again a busy few weeks and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but them and Darren King.
Yep.
There's some folks I want to. I have not reached out to Nick Cook yet, but I do want to.
I've got Nick on the podcast in a couple of weeks as well. So
Leslie Keane, Ross Coldhart, because I think there would certainly be a place for talking about it from a professional standpoint of journalism. I mean, there's some real conversations to be had there. The kind of classes or concerns that would come up in a journalism degree course. There's got to be some kind of never been broached subjects there.
Well, listen, I can't promise or give you any answers on this, but two things. One, let me get in touch with some of those people and just forward on your details to say, just not that my email is going to be any more powerful or have any weight to it, but just to bump up their queue for you as well.
Appreciate
I know what it's like to email folks 10, 20, 30 times and get nothing back. And then randomly, one day you get an email off someone, and then it's 2 weeks before you hear back from them again. It happens, and I'm just as bad for that kind of stuff. So it does get pretty manic and busy. The other one would be, I'm not saying those folks listen to this podcast. I know a couple of them do from time to time. But there's a lot of folks who listen to this that work in very high levels of financial institutes, medicine schools, law schools. They work practicing pretty impressive fields like yourself, decent levels of academia. If anyone wants to get in touch with Luke, reach out to me. Or, I don't know, Luke, if you want to give out any details on here, but if you'd rather just reached out to me first and then got in touch with you.
I mean, I would be happy to receive an email. It's Luke, Luke.Roberts with an S at GCAS. So GCAS.IE.
Awesome.
And that's
so
my academic email.
Yeah, if anyone wants to get straight in touch with Luke about how they could help or any thoughts on that, I'm sure Luke would appreciate it, like you said as well. But look, something I'd just love to wrap up with, I'm asking everyone on this call-in, is this year, 2024, we're just at the beginning of February now. It's been, for some, a slow start to the year. I think if you take a step back and look at the broader picture, we've had quite a lot of news already. What would you like to see, I suppose maybe from an academia point of view, but any way you want this year to happen in the field of UFOs that to you would indicate progress?
I was laughing for a second because, I mean, a year ago, before Grush, I was like binging on UFO stuff. Man, I can't keep up with it. I literally cannot listen to everything anymore.
Yeah.
There's just too much. And so the beginning of this year has been nuts. But to me, it's those 40 witnesses. I'm waiting for or if Grush has firsthand information that he wants to kind of bring himself up as a first hand witness now. But to me, it's about the first hand piece and numbers. It's got to be more than just Grush. We need that we need witnesses to come forward, something that is enough that the mainstream media can't just easily dismiss it as a one-off.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty popular one, to be honest, this year. I would imagine David Grush does have first-hand knowledge. He said as much in the first hearing, and I know when and he never changed his story, but he elaborated on a news piece a couple of months ago, and a few folks called him out for suddenly changing up what he did or didn't know. And actually, if you go back to the original hearing, he said he couldn't discuss it in that open setting, but would behind closed doors. So yeah, I think we've got more to come from David Grush. He's been through a hell of a lot, it sounds like, in this short time he's been in the public eye, but that's enough to put off, I think, a lot of whistleblowers coming forward, but hopefully they see and they hear enough and get enough support behind the scenes that they still choose to do that. So I'm 100% with you on that one, Luke. Listen,
Yeah, and Thomas Monheim, if Thomas Monheim wouldn't mind speaking up, that would be pretty cool too.
yeah, I think there's a few. Who was the one a few folks have said now? Well, Admiral Wilson would be one, Wilson Davis memo, but
Carl now, yeah.
that is not happening
I know.
Yeah, that would be a total 180. Who was the dude? General such and such that Tom DeLong was speaking to Podesta. Oh my god, I forgot his name. Someone mentioned it. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But yeah, I think there's a lot to come sooner than later in the coming weeks. Ross Coulter's alluded at a few things. I know some folks hate that, coming soon, but it is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. It's the quantum nature of the beast. I think you can just put quantum in front of anything and it sounds more intelligent. Do you ever listen to Jay on Project Unity?
Oh yeah, I love Jay.
This has been a bit like speaking to Jay for me. So you'll know exactly what I mean by that.
I do know.
Yeah, no harm to Jay. But listen, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Luke, and best of luck getting Andy. That off the ground.
Thank you.
Next on the line, I've got Phil calling from Asia. Phil, welcome.
Hello, Andy. Thanks for having me on.
Very good to have you on, calling from all around the world on this show at the minute. So listen, you're away out in Asia. The sound is incredible, which I'm very grateful of. So Phil, the floor is yours. What do you want to talk about?
Okay, so I'm calling just to share a kind of an orb sighting experience I had in 2021. So I think for there's a lot of people I'm sure listening who've had various sightings of their own. But I think for perhaps for newer listeners or people who haven't had an experience themselves, I think that there might be something there, even if it's just sort of, I'm just like an ordinary guy, a kindergarten teacher, and just kind of add me to the list of people who've seen something, just seen something a bit weird. And there's a lot of us, So in my case, what happened was, so one night I fell asleep reading. George Knapp and George Knapp's book about Skinwalker Ranch on my Kindle. So just lying in bed, Kindle open next to me, just reading. I came across the part where some orbs followed the previous ranch owner's dogs into a copse of trees, and then they heard dogs yelping, and they didn't come back. And then the next day, there were just scorch marks. And basically, after reading that part, not long afterwards, I fell asleep. And then I woke up during the night, and I'm lying on my back, which is a bit unusual, looking towards the foot of the bed. And there's a little orb there. So maybe sort of small ball of light, white, bluish white, something like that. So about waist height off the ground. And it just a ball of light in my bedroom, essentially. And it moved at a steady speed in a perfectly straight line, just from like across my field of view. Maybe 5 seconds or so, covered about 2 meters or so. And then before hitting the wall, it faded out and just disappeared. And so that is the only kind of anomalous experience I've had in my life. And compared to the ones that a lot of other people have had, it's relatively tame. But it also kind of like opened up a lot of things for me, like in terms of, I guess I'd say like ontological shock. There's a kind of commonly used term, sort of talking about the UFO topic. And I think people kind of I think one thing I could contribute here is just like, I think it's worth really trying to be sort of like brutally honest about quite what that means, because the first time I heard that, I'm like, ontological shock, it sounds really smart and really interesting and stuff like that, but we've got a baby at home, and people tell you like having babies is difficult and it's tiring and stuff like that. What they don't tell you is like, quite how difficult it is. Like postnatal depression is essentially just like women being driven to the brink of insanity by like a baby screaming at them, like attacking their emotional and physical health, not letting them sleep or take care of themselves, and winding up like briefly not liking their own baby, not loving their own baby. And I think ontological shock, it sounds a bit of this kind of like abstract sort of hippie-ish terminology. But in my case, what it kind of boiled down to was like, for months after this event, I'm going to bed at night thinking, please God, let me wake up in the morning. Like, I don't want to wake up during the night and be thinking, why am I awake? Is there anything in my bedroom with me? It's like, it's something, it goes beyond just this sort of sense of like, oh, it's challenging my assumptions and my mind's blown. It's like, is there something in my room with me? And then because of that weird situation where I'd fallen asleep reading a book about orbs and then saw one, that then starts making me question like, what effects do my own thoughts have? I mean, it's basically like it's practically the definition of insanity for most people to be thinking like your thoughts affect the outside world, and yet that's where this sort of thing puts you.
Let me ask then, Phil, because it's a really interesting idea, and it's funny, I get regular emails and DMs off of people that start, Andy, I know you don't like orbs, but, okay, and that's a sweeping generalisation, but I've got my issues with a lot of the pictures and videos, because there's a lot of people post things that are dust or bugs, and they're not orbs, but yeah, there are some more interesting ones, definitely. But let me ask, the first and most obvious thing, you're going to have people listening to this who go, 100%, I'm there, I've been there myself, I've seen it. And then you're going to have folks who sit on the fence. And then I think you're going to have a more skeptical crew who the obvious question is, how do you know? You just read a book, you read about orbs, and you've had a dream, or a very vivid dream. What was it about it that you were like, you were awake?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally valid. And like, I told the story to a colleague, and he's like, are you sure you weren't asleep? Because it's obvious as well. And like, I mean, it's an obvious point to raise. And, I can't be 100% sure that I was awake. But at the same time, nobody thinks that about themselves, do they? Like, you're not sure whether you're awake or asleep, Like, I'm not, I don't have lucid dreams. I don't go sleepwalking or anything like that. And I can tell you, like, when I woke up, I was freaking terrified, Like, I woke up, I'm lying there on my back. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I saw this thing and I'm thinking, what on God, what do I do now? What now? And then my dog, we've got two dogs. They were asleep in the bedroom. One of them didn't wake up. The other one just came right over a few seconds later and started pawing at me. Mm-hmm. And then got up on her hind legs, stuck her nose through the curtains and looked out through the window in the direction the thing had just gone. So it was moving in the direction of the outside wall where the window was. Dog stuck her head out of the window looking out there as if, where did that thing go? That did not help make me feel better. Then I got up, looked out the window myself, and then took the dog outside for a pee, thinking, did she wake me up or something like that? So
could you move? Can I just check, Phil? Could you move at all during the experience as such? Could you move, or was it a form of sleep paralysis, or were you just choosing not to move?
I mean, I don't know if I have a straight answer to that. Like, I woke up and I was just sort of like feeling tense and watching. I don't feel like I was paralyzed. I didn't feel when I chose to move, I could move. To get up and look out of the window. I mean, one other point people might be thinking is, was it a light shining in from outside? So, I mean, there's basically, we're in a ground floor apartment with sort of raised ground outside and bushes and trees and stuff, and there's nothing for sort of, nothing in a suitable direction that could be doing that. Mm-hmm. And one point I didn't mention yet, there was that immediately after seeing it, I looked at my alarm clock and it said 3 o'clock, 3:00. And actually, I'll let you follow up there. I have something else I wanted to say, but I don't want to go rambling. So, did that answer your question? So I've got another point to make if you want, or you can ask another question.
That's fine. Do you know what? For me, like I said, I've had a couple of sightings of my own. One particularly strong. The other one, could have been whatever with the triangle. But the one I saw, the Ferris wheel object, sounds ridiculous. To talk about that and someone else telling me that, would I necessarily believe them? I would take it at face value, but there's no proof. So I think whenever someone tells me something, I'm like, fair enough. They've definitely experienced it, thought they've seen it. I've had incidents where I can't remember, was I dreaming, was I not? But I do get very lucid dreams, which I've always had an interest in. So, but yeah, the experience itself, totally take it at face value on that one. And I know loads more people who will get in touch and say they've had something similar. So yeah, that's great for sharing. What was your second point?
And actually a related thing. So this actually possibly makes it more interesting. Is that a year later, I was watching Engaging the Phenomenon, and the name suddenly escapes me. The ORSAP program manager who wrote the book with George Knapp,
James Lukatsky. Oh,
was it him?
Colm Kelleher.
Colm Kelleher, yes. Colm Kelleher, yeah. So he was on Engaging the Phenomenon, and he mentioned that many people had contacted him saying that they'd had various paranormal experiences, like seeing orbs within 24 hours of reading his book. What on earth do you make of that?
I suppose, I like to sit on the fence with these things and look at both sides. 100%, I think there's an element of, I'm listening to the audiobook of the Secret Machines God's Man in War series just now, and I'm at the start of the God's book, and I've already mentioned that idea of manifesting reality, and Tom DeLonge's talked about this before at length, and other folks have as well. Tom didn't make this stuff up, but I know Tom DeLonge's a big proponent of it. The idea that people can change reality themselves, the power of thought, the power of manifestation, and that's got lots of different names and labels across the world. People talk about sending things out to the cosmos. I remember famously in the UK, Noel Edmonds said before Deal or No Deal, his career was totally rock bottom, in the pan. He had been at the top, he was now at the bottom, no one cared about him, and he wrote a letter and sent it. I don't know if he burned it or put it in the water or whatever, but he sent this letter to the cosmos to ask for a second chance with his career. He then came up with Deal or No Deal. It took off worldwide and massive smash hit. So I get you can, in a way, change your reality, whether it's positive thinking, putting it out there, or whatever that might be. There's also folks in the more skeptical side where it's just chance, coincidence, happenstance. Maybe it's something in between. Who knows? But what do you think? Where does your kind of head and heart sit with it?
I mean, I'm one of those people identifies with as just being out of our depth with this. Like, I think at the simplest level, like the simplest answer to the whole sort of UAP issue and all the related stuff is like, perhaps that there are some facets of our experience that we don't understand yet, and we're maybe dealing with sort of a non-human intelligence that's just vastly, way beyond us. So the physicist Kevin Knuth once talked about in one of his speeches about how, it's very likely that it's very unlikely that whatever is interacting with us just happened to find us now. It's probably been found us a long time ago, and that it's possible to travel across like large chunks of the galaxy in sort of like in weeks or months without breaking the speed of light. When you take into account sort of time dilation for the occupants, I mean, there are so many different aspects of this that are it's just vastly confusing. I feel like we're almost like a valid analogy might be like we're some sort of uncontacted tribe in the Amazon, and we're looking up at a helicopter, and we're all saying, you got one person saying, oh, it's a demon, and the other one's like, oh no, it's an angel, and it's like, oh, it's my it's the soul of my dead grandma. And it's like,
Yeah.
we're all just, I feel like we're just horribly out of our depth with it. So
Yeah.
I would say there's definitely some aspect of our reality that we're, aspects of our reality that we don't understand yet. And I think, probably some non-human intelligence interacting with us. And then beyond that, it's like, it's hard.
Yeah, that idea you're looking up at something and it's an angel, a demon, or the soul of a dead relative doesn't mean it's not all the same thing, it's just labels.
Yeah.
What I'd ask,
Yeah.
though, just to wrap up, Phil, I
Mhm.
want to ask everyone on the call in this month, what are you hoping happens this year, 2024, as relates to the UFO topic that you would see as some form of progress?
I would just say anything tangible, really. I mean, I know the people are split over like government disclosure. Some people want to just, think we should just be investigating it ourselves, and I think just any kind of tangible progress, really. So, I mean, if the U.S. Congress really does have a second go at a disclosure act, then I think, and it's successful, that could be absolutely huge. I think beyond that, really, like, well-funded, well-respected scientists with a solid brand behind them. Like, if Abbey Loeb can find something and he can, he's got Harvard's name behind him, that can be meaningful. I don't have a lot of confidence in, say, an amateur with a FLIR camera is going to solve this for us. I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened already. So, if Danny Sheehan is right and we get another Disclosure Act, and I think that kind of thing is where our best hope lies. One point I would add is that I'm kind of intrigued to know. I have a sneaky suspicion there could be other people listening to this if who've had a similar kind of experience. And I know J. Christopher King often talks about how he wants people to get off the sidelines, and like whenever people ask for progress, he says, like, basically do it yourself, essentially, in a polite way.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious. To possibly share an email address. So if anyone listening to this has had a similar experience, possibly we could question each other and see if we could try to learn anything, or if So maybe that.
Do you want to share that now, or do you want to put it in description, or?
I just created a Proton Mail one called "I'm Not Crazy, You Are" at proton.me. So we can share it. We can possibly share it in the in the notes as well.
Absolutely. And is that I am or I'm not?
I'm like just I am.
I am. Cool. So
yeah.
I'm not crazy. You are at protonmail.
.me.
Listen, Phil, lovely speaking with you. I'm going to ask you, just hang on for 2 seconds. Don't hang up yet. But listen, folks, do get in touch with Phil if you've had one of those sightings as well. And anything like these you want to come on and share, I'm always more than happy to listen. So lovely speaking with you, Phil. Thanks for calling in all the way out in Asia.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Andy.
Joining me now on the line from Tennessee, I've got Nicholas. Nicholas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Very good to have you on. Listen, you got in touch with me about a sighting and some experiences. We've had a caller on already who shared an orb experience, so maybe a little bit of a theme coming up with these, but I'd love to hear yours, Nicholas, so the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, there's not too much to it. It was about 2011 or 2012. I can't really remember the year. It was a long time ago now, but I was living in Boston and I was really close to the harbor one night. You can kind of sit out there. There's this Coast Guard station across from, they call it Old Ironsides, the USS Constitution. It's like one of the oldest commissioned warships still left, built in the 1790s, I think. So we're sitting out across, me and a friend of mine were sitting out across looking at this ship and kind of talking about it. And there was some other naval ships in, either from Canada or Russia. Some other country had a ship in the harbor too. And we were kind of looking at that. It was just, we were from Missouri originally, so we'd never seen any ships that large really. So we're out there kind of talking about that. And all of a sudden it was like this strange feeling like we were being watched. And I looked up to the left and there was just an orb about the size of a minivan, maybe, just floating above the water. And I tapped my buddy and I said, "Hey." And we stared at it. It must have been there for 15, 20 seconds. It just stared, felt like it was staring at us. We were staring at it. He was asking me, he's like, what is that? I'm like, I don't know. It didn't, the perspective of it, it just wasn't, it didn't make any sense. And it was hovering kind of between us and this warship. And we're looking at it, and all of a sudden, snap, it's gone. I watched it. I thought it went straight up to the clouds. I checked with him a couple of weeks ago. We were sharing this story again, and he thought it went underwater. So that part of it's still kind of fuzzy. And at the time, no idea about the phenomenon, no idea about any of that stuff. So we just kind of wrote it off as this strange thing that would maybe make sense one day, but we didn't really know what it was. I thought UFOs were metal crafts, you know. And then later, sometime after 2017, it was a Lou Elizondo interview where he mentioned orbs, and he described an orb, and I was like, oh, I guess we saw something. So that's really all there was to it with that. It was just this very strange, surreal, it didn't match with anything I had ever seen. You know, it was insane.
Had you had an interest in UFOs before the sighting?
I mean, everybody with the History Channel growing up in America knows all the ancient alien stuff, but I mean, I don't think I was ever exposed to any of it, and I don't think I ever saw anything strange until then. And it was just, you know, the guy I was with has seen a couple since then. So I don't really know. I just don't know what it's attached to or where it comes from. Because to me, it didn't seem like an alien. It just seemed like all of a sudden the mod for the game came in and made a change and left. You know, and you were like, oh, where did that hand come from? You know, like
someone's hacking the game, Call of Duty. You know, and they've got an aimbot on. So yeah, that's. It's an interesting setting because you're saying there are various warships there as well. And I'll put my skeptical hat on because I like to play moderator on these calls because it'd be too easy for me to go, oh, wow, what an incredible sighting. That must be aliens. And then next call, because that would be boring. So to try and play devil's advocate, you've got warships around. Is there any chance, 2011, 2012, so drones were a thing, maybe not as advanced as they are now, that it could have been some kind of drone that was there, but you did give an indication of size. What makes you so confident with the size, for example, and the perspective?
I thought about it a lot afterwards because you're right. It's the amount of things that could have been flying around that I'm not aware of are endless, you know. But it was the reflection off the surface of the water. So it wasn't downward lights where you can see an obvious, like, oh, they're shining down, they're shining up, you know. It was just all a big ball of light. It was kind of, it had edges kind of, you know, when they were waving. And then the reason I said 200 feet off the water-ish is just because the actual reflection of the orb in the water was solid.
Okay.
And the size of that reflection, to me, it seemed super close to the water. And obviously, you know, I'm not an aviator. It could have been 350 feet. I don't know.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it would have been a drone to me if it would have left slowly. Because until it zipped off the way that it did, to me, I was just stunned thinking, oh, this is a flare that's not moving. Oh, this, you know, like all the things you're going through. But it just, the way that it moved was, and I've heard lots of people describe stuff like this since then. It's strange to look at, but then when it leaves, when it decides to take off, that's when you go, okay, that wasn't, you know, I've seen a lot of strange things and none of them move like that, you know? So, you know, it could have been a lot of things. And I think the only reason that the warships are, that was the reason we were out there looking, you know. I wouldn't have been out there at that time of night because it was pretty late, you know, it was probably after midnight. But these ships had come in and, you know, we're just down there staring at them, trying to figure it all out. And to have that feeling of being watched and then immediately not look around or look behind me, because there's a Coast Guard station there. You know, we'd been down there before and the cops had come to say, hey, you know, you guys can't be down here at this time. So instead of looking behind me, instead of looking at anything else, just immediately, you know, that's where I'm being looked at from. And that was a strange experience, you know.
And so you've got a feeling of being watched or looked at, something's got eyes on you or senses you even, but was there any noise coming from the object?
No noise. I mean, we heard the waves over everything, and that was just, and I don't know if we could have heard it anyway. I mean, we were pushing each other, trying, you know, like he was hitting me saying, what's that? You know, We've been friends for a long time, so it was just kind of, you grab each other and kind of like, it's just outside of your reality. It just doesn't make any sense when you're looking at it.
No filming, no camera phones to.
I have found some phone photos of that horror since then, and even if I would have been able to do it, I think I had a 2 megapixel camera in 2011.
Yeah.
Boost mobile.
Do you know what? I think even now, if you're looking at 200 to 300 to 400 feet in the air, that's going to be a pinprick of light on a black background, isn't it? Yeah, so I totally appreciate that. It makes me think, you said you saw the object go high when it left, and your friend saw the object go low. Do you think that could have been the reflection of the water, and he sees the object go along the water, but it actually is the reflection of it, and you're watching it up high?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it happened so fast that there's probably somebody in the intelligence community listening to this going like, haha, that was our XYZ drone. This guy's an idiot. So who knows, but who knows where he was looking when it actually took off. He could have been scanning, when something, it left so fast that there's like no way to quantify it. Like, I've heard people describe in interviews, Elizondo described things disappearing into a different reality and shrinking kind of. And then people thought that it was zipping off in one direction, but in reality, like it was just like, some perspective change. So that could be all that it is that it did move so fast that his brain said, well, that went in the water. And my brain said, well, there it goes up, and in reality, who knows what actually happened. I'm not convinced that. It's just fun to share the story because it was the thing to me that finally was like outside of, I was like, okay, that didn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense to me. And it's still confusing.
100%. I wonder, was that your first and last experience or sighting, or we've had 10, 12 years since?
Yes. I've had a lot of I always look for stuff now, but my friends had a couple sightings, and then we had a house that we were living in here in Nashville together that was just like kind of this weird haunted, ghosts and stuff. And we kind of always talked about that kind of thing. And the house was really, really old, and it was built on an old Civil War battlefield. So I think we kind of manufactured most of it, just being scared of the place. But
yeah,
it's like paralysis while you're sleeping, that kind of stuff. But I think people fold that into the phenomenon. You can read a lot of books about it, and they fold it in. And I'm not convinced that has anything to do with it per se. The one thing that happened was that orb zipping off, and I know that wasn't a moment of insanity, and I wasn't asleep. That was just too real, like goosebumps.
I mean, this is pure speculation, but if I said to you now, thinking back 12 years ago now, what do you think you saw that night? And you can't just say orb. What is that for you?
I assumed that whatever we saw came from, at the time, I was like, well, whatever we saw came from one of those ships and was going somewhere or was coming to, I just assumed we saw something we didn't understand. Because at the time, I had a friend who was in the Navy, and she was on one of the big ships, and she would come. They have these fleet weeks where they come to port, and she came to Boston one time and talk to us kind of about the stuff they do. And she would leave things out. She'd be, oh yeah, we can't talk about that. We do XYZ, these things we don't talk about. And it's like, okay, there's stuff I don't know that's going on. Who am I to call that anything? Maybe it was a flare that had a crazy fast acceleration and they needed it to get up quick, or maybe it was a balloon, who knows? But it was nothing. It was nothing like I've ever seen. And I haven't seen anything like it since, and I've watched everything, all of the videos you could watch, those little atmospheric drones that the government built, that they have the little thrusters and they can hold their space. And I've tried to see any example of something that looks similar, and I just can't find it.
No, that's fair. And do you know what? I think it'd be very easy to come on, and you hear sometimes people, they have one sighting experience and then they have loads more after that. But sometimes, not that it's more believable, but I think more palatable to some people to hear someone that saw something once and that was it. There was no follow-up, no more experiences, like that, which is really fair. I'd love to ask, and I'm asking everyone to wrap up their calls with one question. 2024 is well underway. We are almost into the middle of February now, Nicholas. What would you like to see happen in the UFO subject this year that you would consider some form of progress?
I think progress as little as I'm involved is I think if everybody could stop responding to any sort of obvious bad faith arguments online, in the media, whatever. Just if it's obviously a bad faith argument, you can tell we're all smart. We know what we're doing. Like, they're just trying to stir stuff up. Just, there's no reason to combat it, because every click they get, every comment they get, that's the point. The point isn't that you got them and you proved that they were being, debunkers or something. The point is that you engaged and they had engagement. That's what they're doing it for. So progress to me would be ignore Kirkpatrick and all those guys, ignore the people that are obviously arguing in bad faith, and just move on with who you trust and don't give it any more energy.
Do you know what? As lovely as that is, I think we are more likely to get full-on ETs shaking hands with the US president on the White House lawn than people not arguing online. But that is just the world I think we live in now, and we all accept that, don't we? But yeah, I'm with you. Some of the stuff online, mute, block, move along. It's all the same.
And I'm guilty of it. I've done my fair share of it, but I think I've learned that they want you to, they enjoy blocking you, and then they unblock you in 6 months because they need people to read their articles. So, that's the way they do things.
100%. Nicholas, awesome speaking with you. Thank you very much for sharing your sighting and experience, and definitely call in again.
Thank you for having me, bud.
Moving on with the phone in, I have Reese joining me from Ontario, Canada. Reese, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good to have you. And people won't be able to see this, but I do appreciate Reese has joined looking like a proper YouTuber here. Clear camera, lovely mic set up and all that. So Reese, listen, the floor is yours. What is it you want to talk about?
Awesome. Well, I've been a viewer for a long time. And you've had a lot of great interviews. You ask a lot of great questions. I think one thing, I just wanted to pay you a compliment first before we get rolling proper. But, I think the difference for me in terms of like your content and other people's content is your sense of humor about it. A lot of this is so much out of our control that we have to have a little bit of levity with stuff. And I think you do. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate the way you kind of discuss with people and have that sense of humor. But if it's all right with you, and we discussed before, but I've got some questions for you that I think, as a viewer, I would want answered.
Yeah.
So I guess the first one that I have is, in terms of like, from your perspective, these Congress people are coming out of the skiff and saying things like, it really moved the needle, or this moved the needle for me. I think this moved the needle. From your perspective, maybe which 2 or 3 guests that you've had on here would you say have moved the needle for you? And I guess to add on to that, is there anyone still that you'd like to have on that you're really kind of gunning for?
So I suppose moved the needle. Oh God, that's a hard one to say in my accent. Moved the needle would be like, I saw an increase or bump in like people listening and watching and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even your own sort of perspective or understanding of what's going on.
Okay, yeah, that clears it up. So I suppose, and I'm going to forget people. Like, I love speaking to Diana Pasulka the first time. I love the second time recently, but the first time, I really liked her views on stuff, and I think she has that. I'm not a massive UFO person. I didn't come into this like I'm here to prove UFOs are real or not real and stuff. She's got an interesting background and just happened to get involved in ufology, which has been really good and really refreshing. So she's been a great guest for that, and in terms of like popularity, she was great. I suppose it seems like a long time ago now, but the Lou Elizondo stuff back in the day, and not just from like he came on my podcast, he went on everyone's podcast. I think it was like episode 27 or something of mine he came on, and I only remember that because the title had episode 27 in it, the way I used to write them then. And he done everyone's podcasts. He was on people's podcasts who had like 100 average listener viewership, and I think that's amazing. He wasn't asking for money, and if for me, and I could be totally wrong, but if that kind of guy was just there to BS and be a psyop and just lie and make this stuff up, why is he spending time going on some guy's podcast or some girl's podcast that gets 100 viewers or 100 listeners? It's an utter waste of time. You know, it would be crazy. So I think like the Lou stuff back at the time from all the different podcasts he done was really, really good and refreshing. And you got to see him do a lot of different types of shows, not just UFO ones necessarily. I know some people love him, some people hate him. Like, and I think this actually probably goes for a few folks, but like Jeremy Corbell and Ross Coulthart do a lot for people's numbers and shows, which is wonderful whenever they give their time up, as they do to so many folks. They report what they know, and people might like it, people might not, people might sit on the fence. But again, I enjoy seeing their kind of stuff because they know people, and whether you're totally happy with what some Jeremy puts out or Corbell puts out as a sighting or a piece of evidence or a video, it might be a little bit controversial or very quickly get, quote unquote debunked or poo-pooed. I think a lot of those arguments are fair, but it brings in an audience and it brings more eyes and more, perspectives to the subject that people will at least go, oh, well, Jeremy Corbell just released this. Yeah, but actually it was proven to be, a drone or proven to be something else. However, look at this other stuff. So I like those kind of names and stuff as part of the conversation. And as part of who would I like to still speak to? Chris Mellon, although I've got a funny feeling he's going to be doing a lot less this year than he has done previously. Tom DeLonge, 100%, doesn't do anywhere near enough UFO stuff, but he's in the midst of a massive world tour, which is understandable with the band. Is there anyone else? Do you know what? I'm trying to get Sean Kirkpatrick. I've had a few back and forwards with him, as much as some people are
That'll
not.
Be interesting.
Yeah, I think
you have to talk to him.
Yeah,
you have to.
That's it. And do you know what? He might say stuff people don't like or whatever. That's fine. I'm not here to say this guest's on, so you have to believe them. That's up to people to make up their own mind. But I think they've been an interesting conversation to have. And I think David Grush, if someone said to me this year, pick one guest you could have, even over a Tom DeLonge and all that, David Grush, definitely. But I suppose that's half the appeal is he isn't so accessible and isn't on everyone's shows and podcasts and stuff. But does that answer your question?
The appeal of, I think so. I mean, it's hard to dispute the appeal of a guy like David Grush. And I think I would fall on the same kind of camp as you with Lou Elizondo that, why would he do these things if, it's just from a PSYOP perspective, it seems so obviously obvious that it is or isn't, and for that reason, to me, it seems obvious that it isn't. And it'll be interesting to see when Lou's book comes out, redactions and all, what we're going to get or what we can infer, I would say. But yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed. Specifically, it's funny you mentioned Pasulka because that was one that I really enjoyed, and I've kind of fallen down the rabbit hole with her specifically too, and sort of leads into my second question. I would identify as not a religious person. I would say that I'm fairly agnostic. I wouldn't say that I'm smart enough to say definitively that there is one thing or not. So even atheism, I think, is a little bit ignorant of of the broader perspective, but I wonder, as a longtime agnostic, I would say that I've had my sort of religious needle moved in kind of uncomfortable ways over the last year specifically or so, like through the Pasulka conversations and even some of the stuff DeLonge said about Greek mythology and just some of those tie-ins. And so I wonder, and I'm not asking you necessarily to identify your own sort of religious stance, but has your perspective on that shifted in some way through these conversations?
No, but in the sense that I'm not religious, never have been. I've just started listening to the audiobook of the Secret Machines God's Man and War series.
The first one?
Yeah, God's is the first one, I believe, yeah. And I'm literally just at the beginning of it, on the drive back from Scotland yesterday. I'd done like an hour or two, and they're talking about the religions, and I think it says 4,300 religions in the world. And I've always been of the opinion, and this could be totally, ignorant or wrong, that is what it is. But they all come from similar sources and share stories, and they're passed down through tens of thousands or hundreds of years. And for me, it's like, they're just all sharing very similar ideas. And you even see the same quote unquote characters pop up in different religions, just with different roles, to play. Not to say that they don't all have aspects of the truth, but I think they're all going back to the same thing, that, something came here that was more powerful, advanced, whatever it may be, than us. Any advanced technology is famously indistinguishable from magic, and still would be to this day to us. So I'm not religious. I find I have a much easier time believing we've got aliens coming from some distant galaxy than a mythical being that is omnipotent snapped his fingers and went, boom, there's the Earth in 7 days. But maybe a little grey done that one day, and it's all the same kind of stories. Just take labels off and put a different word in, and it all goes back to the same. So yeah, each to their own. If people haven't checked it out, I spoke to Paul Figbin just at Christmas time. It was that time of year that maybe some folks missed it with the holidays and stuff. But he talked about the idea of UFOs and extraterrestrials from a Catholic perspective, and that was interesting with his spin on it, and juggling Catholic faith and the idea of ET, the idea of UFOs, and what that could mean, what it does mean, and that was pretty cool to hear as well. So yeah, not religious though, just each to their own. Believe what they want.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Even some Jeffrey Kripal stuff has pulled me in, or Chris Bledsoe. Again, like my perspective hasn't really changed, but I can almost feel a tug in a certain direction. And to that end, and I guess sort of like on that topic, there was a book that my fiance and I read several years ago. And like, I know you ask a lot of times, you ask people how they got into the subject or what made them interested. I'm 41. And so I think like you're probably similar in age and growing up, aliens, and like this was just part of popular media. Right. So I was always interested as a kid, but my interest became a little more professional in terms of like my commitment to sourcing information and taking in interviews and regarding conversations. It became a lot more serious after we read this book called Journey of Souls by a guy called Michael Newton. I don't know if you've heard of him or heard of that, but it's like, I know a lot of these studies sort of overlap with NDEs, the near-death experience stuff. And like a guy like Robert Bigelow has now moved a lot of his time and study into like post-life or after death kind of studies. And so this guy in this book, Michael Newton, he's a hypnotherapist. And so he does these things called past life regressions. And just for anyone out there who might need a little different context to kind of put together, I would recommend that book. It's a set of case studies of past life regressions. And what really sort of did it for me was it's not religious per se, but it is spiritual in that, a lot of these people who aren't connected, they talk about similar sort of post-death experiences and like having sort of like returning to source energy and some interesting sort of I guess concepts that seem to have some overlap with some of this other stuff I'm reading through Pasulka and American Cosmic and some of these other books, and maybe not specifically American Cosmic, but if you haven't checked it out, it's a name and a book that I haven't heard in this field. So I know you've got a huge stack of books behind you typically, and it just seems to be growing. But one more for you.
Yeah, no, and do you know what? I struggle to read with the just time in life, so I like audiobooks, but I love having the physical book. I struggle to do audiobooks for research. I don't take the information in. I struggle with that. So
I'm the same way.
And my memory's terrible. I've said that so many times. I'm not lying.
Yeah.
So I tend to I like having the book to read and make a note. And I'm still like, right now I'm using paper and pen, even though I've got all kinds of tech all around me. I like writing stuff down, and I'd like sourcing and putting it down. I'll duplicate my work to put it onto a notepad online and write up my notes and stuff. So, but yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah. I know Bigelow got involved in the post-life, afterlife sort of stuff when his grandson died really young.
I don't know exactly what it was that triggered it.
I think he had like a really young grandchild passed away, and that really kicked him into investigating, and he put up the the money, didn't he? I think Jeffrey Mishlove won the award, the grant, for his essay.
There was like an
on,
essay. Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting stuff, and not totally disconnected or unconnected to UFOs, to be fair. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. As you're saying, an audiobook too. I find that I'm only really synthesizing that stuff when I'm reading it off the page or making notes or highlighting. And I guess just the last one I've got here for you, just to keep things on schedule. How do you keep yourself sane? Because I spend a lot of time. I'm sure you spend more than I do. I spend a lot of time each week taking this stuff in between, and I won't, name drop them necessarily, but between like, podcasts that come out weekly, between all the stuff that you get out, and man, you get stuff out at a pretty good cadence. So I gotta give props to you on that. But how do you keep yourself sane? Because you do see the wheels coming off some people out there, without being too specific. And how do you keep yourself sane? Because it's like one foot's in reality and the other foot is by necessity in bizarro upside down land.
I've not really been on like UFO Twitter, for example, for about 3 days. I just don't think I can. Like, I've got busy full-time Monday, Friday, 9 to 5 day job. I've got 3 young kids, and I've got a life around that. So I just find time for other stuff. The podcasts I listen to, I don't put like weaponized or need to know in my normal rotation. I keep that for I'm doing some research or I'm having like a UFO day, and I'll play those kind of stuff like on a certain day. But my normal podcast rotation, none of it's like UFOs or don't have Rogan, none of that. It's all like wrestling and funny, geeky comic book stuff and things like that, just totally unrelated, and football. So it's like I've got my life and I've got this life, and I think that helps massively to do that. And I can just not pay attention to it for a few days. I've just got
Fair
into,
enough.
I think, a good habit with it. That there was a time when the podcast got popular, which I'm so grateful for, and I'd done lots of stuff, but it was too much. And then I think over a short period of time, I managed to work out how I could work comfortably in a good schedule, but also a schedule that I'm happy to keep up. I don't like leaving it a week or 2 weeks. I like to try and put out 2 shows a week, depending on how that works. Sometimes 3, I don't ever want to think I just put out stuff for the sake of it. So yeah, it's just trying to keep a somewhat of a schedule, and it goes back to that thing I've said before, mate. I love podcasts. I do love podcasting as a genre. I listen to more podcasts than I watch TV, and I enjoy the format and the freedom and flexibility. I would surprise people. I bet you watch or listen to as much, if not more, than I do most weeks. But I think I'm just efficient with my time, let's say.
Fair enough. Speaking of efficiency, I saw a poll on UFO Twitter the other day. What speed do you watch your content at?
Normal speed. Yeah.
Do you watch it at normal speed?
Yeah. I don't know how people do it. Dan does it at, like, was it 1.5 or 2 times?
Oh, it's 1.25, 1.5. As soon as you start getting up to 1.75, you're on the verge of being a sociopath. But I can function at 1.5.
No, I don't know how folks do that. Like, I am. My mind is so racy with everything in life generally. I will have conversations in my head with myself while I'm speaking to someone about something else. So when I'm listening to something, I get easily distracted, and I'll have to constantly go back. So to have something firing forward at an extra speed, just not for me. Normal good old one-time speed, and God forbid anyone tries to listen to me in anything that isn't 0.5 at times.
You should hear yourself at 1.5. It's remarkable. You sound like a genius.
I bet if you take some mushrooms and crank up the 1.5, that UFO podcast, it's a hell of a trip. So yeah.
Well, that's the frequency to get you to the other side, I think, right?
I can imagine, yeah. It's what keeps me sane. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you hoping for 2024? You're asking everybody else this.
I am, yeah. So realistically this year, can I be cheeky and have like a few things?
Yeah.
I would love a really decent video to come out akin to like the Tic Tac, the Gimbal type videos.
Yeah.
a bit less spurious, so with a little bit of data to back it up, and maybe it gets more media and mainstream attention than the others have or did. You know, they've been out for a long
Yeah.
time now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see some more off the back of that. I'd love Grush to really be able to push forward with more. And I really think if we're going to get this again in the mainstream, we've kicked the door, and the door opened a little bit, but it slammed shut pretty quickly again to the mainstream
Mm-hmm.
conversation. You need some names there who have worked on objects or biological entities, if we call them that, to come forward and say, yeah, I've worked on this stuff, and it definitely wasn't human. Like
I mean,
we
there's
had Grush and
rumblings that
Fravor.
those people are coming.
And it's just if they make it to the stand, and I don't mean that in a nefarious way, but a lot of pressure can get applied in a lot of different ways to these people, and I don't envy them having to come forward. If you just look at David Grush and what he's been through, that's a lot, and we don't even
Absolutely.
know 90% of what he's had to deal with. So yeah, I'd like to see Grush carry on, but I think there's kind of safety in numbers, and one David Grush is great, but 5 David Grushes would be even better to kind of ease the load a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, and a little bit of unity. That would be good for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
What about you? I have to ask. What about you, Reese?
I want the same. I mean, I want videos, I want pictures, I want that high def stuff. I mean, a lot of people say, okay, the world we live in now is one that you can't trust that stuff with all the AI, and you know, in some ways, I actually think that AI and the way this is going with tech, the confluence of all this technology, the advancements and everything is going to, I think 2030 as a timeline for like disclosure of some form is maybe still a little conservative. Like I don't think the lid's going to be able to be kept on this thing for too much longer with the way tech's going. Like they're having, and sure, the term conversation is blown out of proportion, but scientists are having conversation with whales. Like if you can use AI to decode patterns in animal speech, and then all of a sudden the whales are like, hey, have you seen the shit that's on the bottom of the ocean? Yeah. Like that's a whole different, you know, I don't think that's in 2024, but what do I want to see? I want to see, like you're saying, more high quality video with some metrics or some data that's going to, you know, nail things down a little bit and say, yeah, we got this from like 3 different angles on 5 different sensors, and there's 200, you know, witnesses. So that's, I think, what I want. I'm really looking forward to this David Grush op-ed. Selfishly, I was kind of hoping it was going to drop on Friday so that on this call we'd have that to talk about. But
yeah,
you know, not yet. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to Lou's book, and yeah, just more pics and videos.
a lot of good media this year just on that, because the 3 Body Problem is out late March on Netflix.
21st, I think.
Yeah, it's the 21st. Yeah.
I just bought that book. Actually, it showed up on Friday.
Oh, I've got it. It's hard to, with the translation, to kind of keep in. For
Fair
me
enough.
personally, it knocks me out of it a little bit sometimes with the grammar, but it's just the way that it's roughly translated. I started the series on YouTube, which is free, but then it starts charging you for certain episodes. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And James Fox's new documentary. I would love to see, selfishly, because I've got young children, if Disney Pixar would pick up and do a proper, you know, Encanto, Moana style, but like with an alien, UFOs, and just get little kids into it and talking about it more. That could be pretty cool. Or if Spielberg like rebooted ET and called it NHI, something like that. I don't know. Maybe that's what we could do with in 2024.
I teach a film studies course, and this year I showed Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You know, just get my foot in there in the door as much as I can, help to soften the blow, I guess, a little bit.
Again, they're rebooting everything else. Why not the UFO stuff, the classics?
Why not?
I'd be all for it. Reese, awesome speaking with you, mate. That was really good. I appreciate a few times listeners have done that in the past and put me on the spot, but it's been a good while now, so hopefully I didn't let you down answering the questions. But yeah, awesome, man. Good speaking with you.
You were awesome. You as well. Thanks again.
Joining me now from New Zealand, I have Tad. Tad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Glad to be
Very
here.
good, very good to have you on. Very much opposite sides of the globe right now, but sharing a common, theme, common interest in UFOs. And you've shared with me already privately a story of yours that goes back a few years, and I think you want to share that on the podcast. So the floor is yours, Tad. What do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about UFO close encounter had just over 30 years ago, 1989. And just to set the scene, it was the start of a summer holiday, and I was traveling around with my now wife on a motorbike and a tent, and we were calling at different places, staying in different sort of countryside settings. And this day we found somewhere to camp outside Stratford upon Avon because we wanted to go and see a play. And we found a farmer who let us camp in a newly cropped crop field. And it was a big field, and in the middle there was a little stand of trees and a pond. And we set up camp there, went into town, got the play, came home, had a cup of tea. Sarah was just wrapping up the camp, and I was just doing a little bit of stargazing, and then things got strange. I stood up, and in the trees, I could swear I could see like big fairy lights twinkling all sorts of different colors. And I started thinking, nah, it's got to be, lights in the distance. There's some kind of optical illusion, but that's what it was. There were these strange, like little tiny, kind of big marble sized lights, and they were scintillating. And I said to Sarah, do you see that? And she said, yeah, I can see that. And then I noticed there was something sort of coalescing or forming behind the trees, just at the top of the tree level. And it was like a big, black, misty shape. And after a period of time, it resolved into a craft. It was about the size of a double-decker bus. And now these lights were embedded into its surface. It was matte black. It was the shape of, it was quite strange, a die from the Dungeons and Dragons game. I've never played it, but it was like the D20, lots of facets and a bit squashed. I realized I didn't like this. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want it to be there, but there it was. There was almost a phase where I couldn't take it in or didn't want to take it in, but it was hovering silently above these trees. And then I noticed in a couple of fields beyond the one I was in, there seemed to be like big white four-wheel drive vehicles coming towards us. But as they got closer, I realized they weren't four-wheel drive vehicles. They were some kind of little boxy craft, like a four-wheel drive vehicle that had its top cut off, and they were white and they had a light, and they were coming towards us. And it was just about then I thought, this seems so strange that I didn't even think it was a UFO encounter. It was so kind of just anomalous and paranormal. It was just, and the whole atmosphere in the fields and everything had changed, and time had seemed to slow down a bit, and everything was quiet. And they started coming towards us. Anyway, after that, I noticed along the two very edges of the field, there were these orbs, one each side, and they were moving in a kind of bouncing, floating fashion along the hedgerow. And it reminded me of a barn owl. I've seen a hunting barn owl once. Same thing at the hedgerow, sort of moth-like, almost fluttering, floating. And one went out of vision on the left, one went out of vision on the right. And that alarmed me because I thought, that's when it went from total discombobulation, and the lights initially were mesmerizing. This whole craft was mesmerizing, like a stunned rabbit. But all of a sudden, these things going behind me, I kind of woke up a bit, and I thought, I think I just need to get out of here. And I went to get Sarah. I said, hey, let's go. And she was just transfixed. She was in a trance. In fact, the last thing she saw was the twinkling fairy light thing. She hadn't seen this craft. So I had to really shake her to get her awake. And I said, quick, go in the tent. We're getting out of here. Get my knife. She did that. And we went up the slope of the field right to the farmhouses. And there were some donkeys in a little corral, and they were whickering and quite agitated, but they seemed to calm down. And a bit of a dilemma then. Do you run and get the farmer and wake him up in the middle of the night? and these things vanish, or do you run screaming through the streets? So we just stood there and watched, and we watched for quite a while. And now these white things, they seemed to be doing like a kind of a grid search in the fields beyond ours. I don't know what they were doing. It looked like they were looking for something, but who knows? Crisscrossing and taking their own time. By now the orbs had found separate lattice towers, the electricity grid, and they were weaving in and out of these. They seemed to be really interested in the power towers.
Mm-hmm.
They did this for a while. The whole thing must have lasted something like a quarter of an hour, and we're just watching. And then they meandered off down the river valley. I suppose is the course of the River Avon, and they were almost getting out of sight. I'm very relieved at this point. And then there's two other craft right in the opposite direction that start approaching, and they've got flashing lights. But then I could hear them. I could hear the jet engines, and it was two jets, fighter jets, and they were sort of converging on the first craft, the D-20 thing. And they got fairly close, but then it just zipped away up in about 35-degree angle, and it just went at incredible speed, and it was gone. And we walked back to our tent, and we didn't discuss it, which is strange. And we went to sleep, and we got up in the morning. We didn't discuss it, and we packed up, went on our next place to visit, and halfway through the morning we stopped for petrol and something to eat, and we just conferred, did you see what I saw? And we saw the same thing, and we kind of after that point we kind of put it behind us and got on with the rest of our holiday. And
Tad, you say that's strange you didn't discuss it. That's quite a common thing that comes up where two or three people or a small group will have an experience, and when it finishes they don't talk about it. Not for some time down the line potentially. So honestly, that's something I hear quite often in various stories, whether they're well known or not. I want to take you back, and thank you for sharing that. You said when you initially saw the craft, you had an uneasy feeling. You didn't like it. You didn't want to be there. You hear sometimes people have these sightings or experiences, and they feel very calm, very positive. Was this just a normal feeling of the situation and just your body's natural response, or was it the object, the craft, aware of you and making you feel that way? If you understand that sort of question.
I do understand, and I would say it is a bit of both. I mean, in that moment, a lot of ontological shock, a lot of discombobulation. The things were happening that I never thought could happen, and seeing things I never thought. It was like a massive transgression of the natural order of things. It's just so bizarre and strange. And it's, how do I say this? I got a sense that something was telling me, whether it was the craft, and I don't think there was beings in the craft. It was like a weird quasi-technological thing that was like a massive, almost like a huge dramatic drama show, was telling me, if you want to stay safe, you should move away. And so we did.
Do you feel the object was aware of you?
Oh yes, totally. And I even think it's occurred to me that the stargazing I was doing triggered it. It was very close. I mean, I could have thrown a tennis ball at it and hit it, and it was interacting, using the flashing lights to draw attention, keep attention. It was using, how do I say this? I suspect it was using our awareness of it to manifest.
And do you think it was distracting you from something else that was going on? This is something I've seen recently. A few people mention where are these objects there and putting on some form of light show to distract because something else is happening in the nearby area. You mentioned the orbs and the electricity pylons, the towers. I wonder if you've thought about
that. No, not thought about that, but thinking on it, my honest answer would have to be, I don't think it was distracting us. I think it put Sarah in a trance, and I don't know why. But I think I had a continuous form of awareness of it, and it was a show. I saw everything. That's what I feel. But
Immediately
yeah,
after that, were there any incidents you had of kind of high strangeness, if you want to call it that? Did your dreams change at all, or was it very much an isolated sighting?
It was an isolated sighting. Yeah.
And
No
after that,
strange
had you
dreams.
had any more?
No more. And I don't think I'd want to.
Why do you think that is then? Because I've spoken to listeners on this call-in who have had one sighting, one experience done. Others who have shared multiple 5 to 10 over their lives with recurring incidents. Why do you think you were there, Sarah was there, you had this experience, and that was it? Do you think it was meant to be that way? Do you think it was right place at the right time, or wrong place at the right time, if that's the case?
I don't know. I think it was there because we were there, or attracted its attention, maybe. Not that, don't feel anything special about it. It maybe used our presence there as a trigger, or came there because the conditions were right for it to be able to be there, and did whatever it was doing, which I don't know what it was doing, and then like mission accomplished. I mean, I wrote my story about 30 years later and didn't speak to anybody about it because it was too strange. So unless someone had seen it like that, they weren't going to understand it or believe me. So there's no point. But looking back now, maybe it was so I could write my story and put it out in the world 30 years later. So I think that these things have different timescales than us.
I've mentioned that before on the podcast. I don't think it's totally unreasonable that people have an experience at one point in time to share it at a later date. I've mentioned the aerial school phenomenon and what those children saw, and its own really in adulthood, the story is caught fire again, and people would wonder, well, why decades later? Well, why not? Is this not a good time in society? If that aerial school documentary came out 20 years ago, does it have the same impact in 2004 with all that's going on in the world? I don't think so. No. Whereas it comes out now, it has its place, doesn't it? And that's the same for stories like yourselves as well.
Yeah.
What I want to know though, Tad, just to wrap up the call, I've been asking everyone the same question, and I want to know, in the year 2024, we're getting into the middle of February now, what would you like to see happen in the UFO field this year that you would consider some form of progress?
That's a strange question, because what's progress for us is not maybe progress for the phenomenon and what's happening. And well, obviously, it would be good if we could understand what's going on, a little bit more. Maybe a little less focus on the whole disclosure, crash retrieval angle. No, that's not important, and I, downplaying it. I suspect that's being put in front of us almost like a distraction. So we focus on that part of the whole field, which I don't deny probably isn't a reality, but I think it's the tip of a huge iceberg. I think the larger part of things is what people are experiencing by the thousand every day. Has been going on for years and years and years. What does it mean? What's it doing to people? What is the value in all these encounters and stories that could be possibly a little bit more worked on and analysed to help us all understand what's going on?
Excellent. I like the idea. Tad, thank you very much for taking time out your day all the way over in New Zealand to join me on this one. I really enjoyed hearing about your own experience, your sighting. Would you like me to put the link for the story within the description of the podcast as well?
Oh, I'd like that very much. Thanks, Andy.
I'll pop that in there. But Tad, thank you very much, and a pleasure speaking with you. Do call again.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Next up on the call-in, I've got Kat in California. Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your podcast and your interviewing style. So it's really a pleasure for me to be able to share my time with you and to share my UFO stories with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kat. The floor is yours. What is it you want to share?
Well, I've been in this UFO nonsense for a while now, like just studying it from the sidelines. And I would say, like in the early 2000s, I started when YouTube like first came out. I started doing a lot more research and came upon a couple of interesting places to visit. So back in those days, if you recall, it was just the two Stevens that mostly had the floor, like Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett. But there was also this guy named James Gilliland at the ESETI Ranch in Trout Lake, Washington. And that's not that far from me. So I thought, I'm going to head up there and just see what's going on, because he had posted some videos and there were like these mysterious lights in the sky, and he'd shine these lasers on them and they would do the flare-ups. And so I thought, okay, I just want to go and check it out and see what's going on up here. And so I went for a Qigong workshop on a weekend, and I was sitting having lunch with somebody, and we're sitting facing Mount Adams. So this ranch is about 8 miles from Mount Adams, which, if you recall, is where Kenneth Arnold sighted those UFOs or flying saucers. And as I'm looking at the mountain, I'm seeing this bright light flash. And after the bright light flashed, it looked like, it's going to sound crazy, but it looked like doors sliding open and a light in the door, and then the doors sliding closed. So it was like the doors that you would see at a grocery store, like sliding apart, like on Star Trek. And so the guy that I was sitting with, we just both looked at each other. We're like, did that just happen? Like, what did we just see? So I don't really know what that was, but that, kind of piqued my curiosity. So that would be my first experience not the first experience, but the first experience I would like to share. And then the second one was I decided to join a group who was going to do the ESETI protocol. So this wasn't Stephen Greer, but they were doing the same protocol. And this was in Joshua Tree, and which is a pretty cool place, by the way. If you ever come to the States, that's the place I would definitely recommend highly. There's a place not too far from Joshua Tree where there's this building called the Integratron. I think some guy named George Van Tassel built this, and apparently, allegedly, some aliens gave him the instructions on how to build this, and he built it without any nails. And I guess it's perfectly acoustically tempered, like in the middle of this dome. You can look it up online. You have to get a reservation to get in now, but so the place is just kind of steeped with UFO lore. So we weren't at the Integratron, but we were pretty close to it, not exactly in Joshua Tree, at this very strange, like Airbnb. And I'm sharing a house with 3 other people, a couple and this other woman. And it was like a 5-night stay. And on the 4th night, I'm sitting outside. It's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting with Faye, the woman that I'm with, and she says there's a flash in the sky. And so I go to look at this flash, and I'm seeing what looks like gold dropping down, like liquid gold. And I thought to myself, this has to be a Mylar balloon, like a gold Mylar balloon. And then shortly after, she says, just grab your flashlight, we're going in, because we hear this rustling. And because it's out in the middle of nowhere, it could have been a raccoon, but she hears this rustling. So we run back into the house. And then the next morning, the man who's sharing this space with us asked, what were you and Faye doing last night running around the house? And we weren't running around the house. We just ran into the house. Well, later that morning, we found this very strange little footprint, which was probably about 7 inches long. It had 4 toes and a clear heel. I took many photographs of this. There was only one in the trackway. I didn't see any other footprints leading up to it. So this mysterious footprint appeared. And then that night, we had probably the best night of UFO sightings, which was, it started out with us in the group at night. 5 to 7 large great horned owls swooped into the area and started doing their call and response. And then shortly after that, against the mountain range, we see a light. And then the light becomes 3 lights. And the 3 lights becomes 5 lights. And the 5 lights become 1. And then it becomes 2. So we did this whole, like, lights becoming 1, becoming 5, like for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. And then shortly after that, a fog came in, like a very thick fog. And we all kind of went our separate ways. And the next day, we all went home. So, so those are probably the best UFO stories that I've had in my life. But and of course I've seen some strange lights in the sky, but those were the ones that somebody else saw that with me. Like I could share that experience with somebody else. Yeah. So
awesome.
that's
Thanks.
it.
Thanks for sharing. So let me take you back to the first one where we're looking at those kind of sliding doors. And I've got something in my head and I can't think what it's from. It's going to be a TV show or a movie with that sort of effect. But what do you think you're looking at when you see doors? Do you think you're looking at some sort of actual door, i.e. a portal to somewhere?
I it's hard to say because it looked like landing bay doors opening, and then closing again. It was just a very strange thing. And this mountain, so Mount Adams is pretty granite on that side. As far as I know, there were no roads up there. It was a pretty big light. Like if I were to hold my hand out in front of me, it was maybe half the size of my pinky nail. So it wasn't a small light. So in imagining somebody hauling enough electricity to shine a light 8 miles away to make it look that big, I don't know what it was. I heard.
Let me clear up because I'm thinking maybe I've misunderstood slightly because I was engrossed in the story. Do you think the light or the doors, let's say, were physically on the side of something, or did they appear to be in the air, or would that be too hard to distinguish?
Okay, it's gonna sound crazy, but it felt like they were on the mountain. Like the mountain had like a quote unquote secret door that opened. I mean, I'm saying it and it just sounds like crazy, right? But that's kind of what it looked like.
That's not uncommon, this idea that certain places have ranges that may or may not contain bases. And again, it's that the language starts to become, like you say, crazy sounding, doesn't it, to anyone without a decent interest in the topic, that there's alien bases or some kind of secret. But why wouldn't you have stuff deep underground, and why wouldn't you have stuff buried deep in a mountain range, whether it's our tech or something else's or a shared space? I mean, obviously you must think back to these kind of moments and times, but if you had to speculate on what you were looking at, what do you think you were seeing?
I think it was like a door opening up and a door closing, and there was something inside, that produces a light. Yeah. And I know this area is notorious. Like we were instructed to not to bring a lot of attention to the ranch. So like if we went into town and talked to people from the town, to not really talk about like, oh, we're up at that UFO ranch. But I didn't follow the rules, and I actually did that. I talked to somebody. This woman came out as I was admiring her lilacs, and she asked me what I was doing up there because I was clearly somebody not from the neighborhood. And I told her that we were at this ECETI ranch looking for UFOs, and she said, well, please don't tell anybody this, but my husband and I see them regularly. So, it's kind of like this secret thing that people don't talk about. But yeah, so that's what I thought I saw.
So the second one, I'll be more skeptical and ask your opinion. You were asked, what were you doing, you and Faye, I think it was. What were you doing running about at night, and you weren't. Is there any chance those footsteps had been deliberately put there as, a kind of, or do you think genuinely something made that footprint?
That's a great question. I was thinking somebody could have gone out there and just plopped this footprint down or whatever. But there were no other footprints up to it. Of course, they could have erased it. It was loose sand. Yeah, it's very possible that somebody could have done that. It was just this very strange little footprint out of nowhere.
I'm only thinking, and again, playing devil's advocate, playing the skeptic here, if I wanted to have folks at a ghost retreat in some kind of haunted mansion, you would want to make sure some curtains rustled. You'd want to make sure there were some bumps in the night, to make it an authentic experience. And yeah, so I suppose you're always going to have that, aren't you, when you go to a retreat? That I'm guessing it wasn't free. You had to pay for it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, I'm not to say that there's anything wrong with that. Time, money, accommodation, all that stuff, that's fine. But more skeptical folks are going to look at it that way. But for you, you see what you see those lights. Again, anything artificial about the lights, or Did you get a feeling along with it?
Okay. At first, I thought maybe it was a motorcycle group, like up on the mountains, like driving back and forth. But again, the size of the light it just didn't look like car headlights or a motorcycle headlight. I don't know what they were. I did try to drive out that way on my way home to see what kind of road there was in case somebody had somebody drive by. I don't know. It was just a very odd thing. I mean, there were other things that happened in the sky the week, before this, this thing with the mountain, but that was the clearest one where it was the strangest thing. The other things were more like, could it be a satellite? It could have been a satellite. It's near a military base. Could it have been some aircraft flying around? But that one was just the strangest one because there was no sound to it. Like, I don't know if I would hear a motorcycle sound from that far, but it was just odd.
And I'll have to ask you a difficult question because it is pure speculation. But what do you think you're seeing when you see these lights?
I just don't know. That's the question. Like, I just don't know. Like, even like part of the reason why I'm so intrigued in this subject is because there is a lot of I don't know. So wouldn't it be great if we could have a nuts and bolts? Wouldn't it be great if we could shake some non-human intelligence hand? But it's just one of these kind of high strangeness mysteries, right? I've just kind of had experiences in my life where high strangeness would kind of appear and then disappear. And I don't know. It's a mystery. It's a very cool mystery, though.
Well, they do. And in my day job, right at the end of the day, I've got I was with a group of kind of a lot younger folks, and I was asking them, what they were doing tonight, and the typical answer of someone between 20 and 25 of nothing. And I was like, okay, interesting, you're doing nothing. And they asked me, what are you doing? And I went, if you really want to know, I've got a podcast. And they were like, oh, what's that about? And I actually let them jump on the Spotify chart. And I was like, if you can guess, I'll tell you. And eventually one of them was like, UFOs. And I was like, it is. There's a few, but there you go. That's the name of it. And they were like, do you believe in aliens? And I was like, think of it this way. And I said the same thing, what if it's not aliens as we know it? And it was funny that one of the girls who's quite young, so 20, she asked me if I believe in aliens. And I didn't say yes or no. I just said to her, what if there was something here that wasn't us, but it wasn't human? And she went, well, yeah, I could believe that. It would just mean it would be something else. And I'm like, yeah, but what if it was something intelligent that wasn't us and wasn't human? And she went, yeah, just like an other type thing. But the way she was quite dismissive of the alien idea, but not dismissive of something else, which, is that any different, really? So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more with them tomorrow when I get to see them. But yeah, just asking that question of, what is it, I think is very loaded. And when you get away from the initial, do aliens exist? Are these aliens, do you believe in UFOs? You start to drill into that. Well, what are you looking at? And I think it's still a fair guess and assumption, like you say, Kat, I don't know.
Right.
It could be A, B, C, D, or none of them.
Yeah, this is why I really appreciate the work of Diana Pasulka, because she's asking these questions. Is this something that we are co-creating in the culture at the moment, or because again, it's like I don't know what that is. I've seen strange things and I don't know what they are, and to be able to just chalk it up to just human technology. Some of them are just unexplainable. And some of the stories that I've heard from your other call-in guests are just like, it kind of leave you, with your mouth open and wondering. But it's kind of nice to be able to have that mystery and to be able to ponder that. So, yeah. So that's my story.
Yeah, no, and thank you. Let me ask one more question before we wrap up. I've got a few people genuinely waiting as much as I record this to hear.
Sure.
I've asked everyone in 2024, what would you like to see realistically happen in the UFO topic, in the UFO field, that you would consider progress?
Oh, I'd like to see at least the United States government admit to it in a way that feels truthful and real. I do think we've been kind of blindsided, and, all these people talking about their experiences and, David Grush coming out, and I don't know. I would really like some accountability. I know I understand like national secrecy and security. I understand all of that, but there needs to be some accountability. And I think that to me would be a really good thing to see and to hear. So, we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Well, Kat, thank you very much for calling in, and I would love to hear
welcome.
from you again. Hear some more of those stories.
Okay. All right. Take care, Andy.
On the line with me now, I've got Donald in London. Donald, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Listen, Donald, the floor is yours, and you've mentioned to me you've got a few different sightings you've had. If you want to start opening up with those, that would be great.
Yeah, over time, I've had a few sightings. One in the west of Scotland. I don't know, you might be familiar that when you go to the countryside, you see when you have cloudless skies in Scotland and I'm sure other places, an amazing sky. So one night, it was actually the night of my brother's wedding, I was taking a dog for a walk in the field not by the house, and the dog was running around, and I was looking up and just looking at all the stars, and suddenly I was noticing what I thought was a satellite going across. I thought that's pretty good, and then it was going in a straight line and suddenly veered to the right really quickly. And I just thought that was very odd because of the speed. You couldn't hear it. It was very high up. But I thought it was odd in that, first of all, it could be explained. It could be a fighter jet, for example. You wouldn't hear. The turnaround was too fast for a commercial jet. But the strange thing was, and I only realized later, our dog, which is a border collie, used to, every time there was a plane flying over, going to or from North America, it would bark when we were outside, because it would hear whether it's infrasound, but it didn't on that occasion. Anyway, the second time was probably the most profound time. I was in Westchester County on the right side, the east side of the bank of the Hudson, and I was staying with some people on their big estate, and I was having some really interesting discussions, and I was very much in the moment. And suddenly I reached I was having a nice walk, but it was dark, with just some lights around, and going to the house. And suddenly my eye was caught looking far off, a huge light behind the clouds. I thought, oh, it's this lightning or something. And suddenly this giant globe or ball of, it was an orb, was moving very quickly from behind the cloud, and suddenly I saw it, and it was going in incredibly fast and heading downstream as if it was heading down to New York. And it was relatively low, no more than, say, 2,000 or 3,000 meters above the ground. And I had no time to react and putting out my phone, but it was very profound because it was silent, very large, bigger than an A380 in terms of diameter. And I'd looked for if there was confirmation that other people had seen something, and I saw nothing, which I then also found was very strange. And only later in reading realized that sometimes only some people see things, but that's another issue. The third time I was in the Greek islands and was staying with a friend at the top of a hill on one of the islands, and suddenly my friend she shouted, "Look at that!" Because we were sitting beginning to have a drink. The sun had just set, and there was a smaller orb over the natural harbour, again about 1,000 meters. And it was relatively small, but bright, incandescent. Pulled out my phone, and suddenly another one appeared, the same height, same luminosity, same size. So I pulled out my phone to try to take some video, but you know how rubbish mobile phones are, especially when it gets darker. But there were two of us who saw that. But suddenly, after a few seconds, they both went out at exactly the same time. The fourth time, I was by a river and I was watching it, but it was in town. And looking, suddenly my eye was caught with a white balloon, and it was going along the river. And then suddenly I realized it was slightly jerky movements, but still going towards, going away from me, but against the wind. And I just thought, suddenly I realized the luminosity was within it, and suddenly it shut off and out of my eyesight. And then the fifth time was, I was actually in Egypt going from the airport into the middle of town. And I saw, which I thought was a plane in the distance heading towards the airport. But I was already in a car going quite fast, actually, strangely for Garo, this strange shape, because I realized as it came a bit closer, it wasn't a plane, because there were only about 4 lights. There was 4 lights on the side, and there was a structure that looked like a V, but I couldn't quite make it out. Again, I pulled out my phone, but we were moving fast, and all I can see is some dots in the phone. And I just thought, anyway, that was the last time I saw anything. But I just thought, in all of these experiences, I thought how strange. And I only bring these stories up to a few friends that I trust, because some people still think you were a bit of a loony in even seeing one, never mind 5 times. So that was the orbs.
No, that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that, because it does take a lot. And I mentioned this to one of the callers earlier, Donald, that it's hard enough to talk about one, but it seems to be if you talk about multiple, people do almost find that harder to swallow, that it's not been a one-off thing. And that's, I think you just have to take these things at face value. Five is, more than a coincidence. I doubt that's right place at the right time. Do you feel, either yourself or if you want to speak more generally, that people can be predispositioned to either these sightings or these things track certain people? What do you think? It's purely speculative.
Well, first of all, I think I said earlier, I don't like to be hard and fast on things. I observe. If I experience something, I experience it and then try to understand what it was. But it doesn't always come in something like a sighting. You don't know why it happens unless you perhaps have a very direct experience, which in my case that didn't happen. Although I can say the strange thing is various other things have happened to me and my family. My great-grandmother in northwest of Scotland, my grandmother, and my sister and I, and actually my brothers, all of us have had at various times supernatural experiences. And my grandmother used to dream of people before they died. They would know that their death was coming. But something odd happened, and I brought this up with my sister when we were quite close in age, and we were playing. We were maybe between 7 and 10. We'd play with friends this game of Ludo, where you've got this hemisphere of a dice in the middle, and you press the plastic, and the dice inside jumps. Well, statistically, you'd have the same numbers coming up roughly regularly. With the two of us, we would have 4, 5, 6, 7, or even 8 times a 6 come up that would give us a free throw. It was only later I realized that how statistically significant or notable that was, that we were, I think, in some way affecting what we saw, because we were so excited at winning. But I can't explain that. But I've had a number of prophetic dreams over my life. One of them was the night before Pope John Paul was shot, where it was incredibly symbolic. And I mentioned that to people in the morning before it happened. And I've had other prophetic dreams. One of them was a major geopolitical dream, which was still happening. And then another time where there was another instance where I actually heard something which turned out to be true a few months later. It was as I was waking. And then I had another dream that prepared me for a professional problem, which in the end prepared me so well that I was able to weather the problem and move on. But I also have to say, because I realized that I'd seen things and I've seen other things happen, and my brothers, as I've said, I've seen and heard things, I decided to join a group some years ago, not unlike perhaps something like the Monroe Institute, which I have to say I'd love to go to in America, but in a group where we were trying to train to see if we had talents or not. And I tried. I was asked by the teacher to get up and say, practice mediumship. And I was very scared. And I just closed my eyes. And then suddenly I felt something to my left. But I knew it was me, but me was 6 or 7 meters away. And it was something that came and touched the edge of my energy. And then I had these flashes of information about this person and their life. And somebody was listening in the group that was training, and suddenly it was for her. and it became very emotional for her. And then on another occasion, I was having dinner with friends, some of whom were diplomats, and a friend had brought his wife, who'd only met once before, and suddenly I had the feeling of someone being with her, behind her. I couldn't quite see, you don't see it physically, but I gave a name and then description of somebody who'd had quite a troubled life, and all of it was spot on. And so I bring up these things to say, you asked the question, I'm not altogether sure how I've been able to do these things, because I don't normally do it. My work is far removed from anything like this. It's very factual, always based on evidence. I read a lot, but I don't normally have a life where I'm connected to this on a day-to-day basis. But over the last few years, I've begun to read a lot more and watch a lot more. You know, I watch your podcasts. I could listen all day to Bernardo Kastrup, Kurt Jaimungal, for example, who I think are absolutely tremendous, and other people like Ross Coulthart and Com Kelleher and Leslie Keane, Jack Valet, and Christopher Bledsoe, who I think is very interesting, and Chris Mellon, and a few other podcasts like Project Unity with Jay. Fascinating, all of them, all of you, or Whitley Strieber, or Grant Cameron, and I think, or Suzanne Giesman and Chrissy Newton and Dana Walsh-Basoka latterly. And I think that one's got to be learning. I think the moment that someone says they know what's going on, you realize that that's not the case. And I'm not perturbed by all of this, but I'm certainly shaken by different experiences, particularly the orb that I saw in Westchester County by the Hudson, because there were no reports. I'd looked on the night that it took place. I remember, I know when it was. But I know that something happens, and that's why the more that happens, the quieter I become about it.
Let me ask, how has it changed your life? Because I think you'd be used to your average, I say your average person, but someone who displays sort of mediumship or whatever people may think about that, goes off and does that, as you say, as a profession or as a way of making money or just helping people. But for you, it's very much been a quiet, personal experience. It happens, you move on, you think about it, but you don't explore it necessarily or try and take these things further. It's very much been like an observational relationship. How is that kind of changed your life?
Well, I think part of it, and it's a bit like growing up, it's a bit like an education, and you put it all together. I mean, years ago I had a digital camera, maybe it was about 20 years ago, and I was going around taking photos, and I saw what I thought were loads of flecks of dust, and realized later there were tons of small orbs inside buildings. Or even actually I was being interviewed for a TV thing, and suddenly there was a little orb that came down and around my head live, and I thought that was a little weird. But I think that how it's changed is it's just made me a little bit more alert. I'm certainly sensitive to the environment of places. I'm a member of a club, and there's some days I don't want to go in as I'm heading to it, and other times I'll go in thinking, oh, it doesn't feel right. Another time I'll go in and feel very much at home. Or going to people's houses or whatever. I've realized I've become quite sensitive to environments, and that I'd rather say no to something than yes if it feels a bit off. But so that I think how it's changed me is I've become quieter, more thoughtful about the reality that we have, and asking more questions.
Where would you like these experiences to lead?
Goodness knows. I think that some of the things that happened to one of my brothers, for example, would be a bit scary, where there were footsteps and squeaking stairs and things like that, and doors that might try to be opened. But then again, when I was in Egypt, I went to the Temple of Dendera. I think Jay at Project Unity were excited at this one, but I had on my second last mobile phone, I was inside, and there are different parts of it, and it's the last major temple that was built in ancient Egypt. Quite fascinating, very beautiful building, and still painting that's still there. But I was going around, and I had some other friends that were with me, and I was putting the phone up to take a photo of certain areas, and in the viewfinder you could see this white smoke moving around, but you couldn't see it in reality through your eyes. But I was able to capture on that one. I was able to capture some smokiness in different parts of that complex. And I just thought it's interesting. But then when I showed some of my friends, it was freaking a few of them out. And I think the point of all of this is it's got the potential to scare people. And I think one of the issues that a lot of people say, have disclosure now rather than this slow drip. I'm of the belief that a slow drip of news is better to get people to become more awake to what's happening and understand and be learned about it. But I think if it happened very quickly, we don't know what it is. And the more I learn, the more I realize that it or what they are determines what happens. And if we look at COVID and the reaction of the wider world, there was a lot of panic. And I think we have to learn from that, especially if there are elements of what it is or they are that might be frightening, that might frighten people too quickly.
That's a very good point. And I just want to ask, as we wrap up on this one, Donald, you've been very good with your time and your sharing. What would you like to see happen in the UFO subject this year, 2024, that you personally would see as progress?
I think a drip of news from people of authority that would either be governments, military, although I think that's unlikely, through the body politic, I think, is a major remove from this. It's still too much for an odd subject for them. But it may happen through others. It may happen through individuals or people of significance or through science. Luckily, we've got some people of note who are serious, who are actually trying to understand what this is. I mentioned Bernardo Kastrup and Kurt John Mungle, Ross Coulthart and others, but it may happen to you, Andy, or anyone listening to this, that something may be so profound and is seen by others that then goes into a bigger narrative and then other things happen. So I'm not sure I want to see something, but I would like to see further understanding of what all of this is, which means people have to perhaps be less distracted and really begin to understand who they are, and perhaps meditate on what things are, or at least really think about what's happening and does it affect them and their part in it.
Well, Donald, thank you so much for sharing those experiences, those sightings, your thoughts as well. There was a lot crammed in there, but you spoke very well on it. So thank you very much, and I'd love to speak to you again on that.
Thank you.
We move on this call-in over to John, and John is in Canada. John, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Angie. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm a real fan of your podcast. You and Dan do a tremendous job.
No, thank you very much. Listen, John, this one is all about the listeners. So the floor is yours. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I want to talk about a series of odd events that happened while I was actually writing a book about what I knew about the phenomenon for my daughters, and I thought your listeners might find it interesting. If it sounds like I'm reading from notes, it's true, because my power of recall is not the best at age 67. So I'll be referring to my notes as I
that's all right.
Refer this to you. So I remember watching Whitley Strieber on a podcast once, and he made the statement that when you look at this phenomena long and hard, sometimes it looks back at you. And I think that may have happened to me while I was writing about the paranormal. So my relationship with the paranormal goes back to 1970. I was 14 years old. And it's interesting that I can remember every detail of this so clearly. And I have such a pathetic memory. I was 14, standing in the front yard of my parents' house in Toronto, and the day was absolutely gorgeous, not a cloud in the sky, when I saw this fairly large sphere. It was looked like it was made of brushed aluminum, and it had spikes to it. If you've ever seen a World War II marine mine, that's kind of what it looked to, except the spikes came to a point, and it was tumbling through the sky. And I thought to myself, well, that's got to be a satellite falling out of orbit. And that was really a dumb thing to think, I suppose, because it would probably be red hot if it did survive entering the atmosphere. There'd be some sort of trail of smoke, but there wasn't. I could see every detail of it. It was fascinating. But I've just put it off that it's a satellite falling out of orbit. And that's really where my fascination happened and where it started with the UFO and UAP phenomena. I think most people, and correct me if I'm wrong, yourself included, see something, see a craft, and you say to yourself, that's not of this world. And it kind of fuels your inspiration to learn as much as you can about it. Mine was a little different. I just put it down as a satellite, but still I had that thirst for knowledge. So a few years ago, I was on the MUFON website, and I was looking at a page which listed all the various types of craft that have been spotted through the years, and there was the craft that I had spotted when I was 14. So it made me realize that that was a craft. It wasn't a satellite. So that I continued researching this topic, and admittedly through the years I was busy with helping raising my two girls and with my career. So I paid as much attention to it as I could. I remember clearly May 9th, 2001, I was watching a disclosure project with Dr. Stephen Greer, and it was fantastic. And I jumped out of my chair and did a fist pump, naively proclaiming, finally everyone is going to know the truth. Well, that couldn't have been so it couldn't have been more wrong. A little bit about myself. I was the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister. My brother was brilliant, but he was an odd fellow. And when we were adults, we didn't really keep in touch. We were kind of estranged. In 2021, he reached out to me to be his advocate for what we call in Canada medical assistance in dying. It's called the MAID law. Mm. He was dying of ALS, so we reconnected. And to my surprise, he was a researcher of the phenomena. We had a great year together, and there was nothing I could tell him that he didn't already know. He was very well versed in the topic. But it was very strange that we both followed the same path. So my brother's illness made me think of my own mortality, and I decided to write down everything I knew about the phenomena for my two girls, so that would help them deal with the coming disclosure if it ever happened. I mean, to me, this is the most important story in human history, but the truth is just surrounded by bullshit and misinformation. It's hard to navigate through it. With me, the manufactured stigma of this topic had done its job well, and I rarely spoke of it. I kept it to myself. I was afraid of being ridiculed by my friends, and I rarely spoke of it even to my family. So my goal was to lay out all aspects of the phenomena and try to provide at least 3 case studies for each of those components, and provide links to the source material, recommendations of people they could follow and trust, podcasts. Yours is number 1, Andy, in the back of my book. Documentaries and books to read that they could refer to. So I know the paranormal is linked to the phenomena, but how that is, it just baffles me, and I think it baffles everybody, to be honest. When it came time to write about it, the subject matter to me was obvious. It was Skinwalker Ranch. It was the fall of 2022, and I read 2 books, The Hunt for the Skinwalker and Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and I watched as many documentaries about it as I could find. And then something anomalous happened. The first thing that I noticed was I started hearing a noise in my head. I could best be described as, if you can imagine the beating of a rotor of a helicopter. And this would happen periodically, but usually 3-4 times a week I would hear this, usually outdoors. I remember not long ago I was reading UFO of God, which I see is in your pile on your desk. Yeah. And I almost dropped the book when there was a part where Chris Bledsoe talked about his son waking up screaming in the middle of the night, and he complained of hearing the sound of a helicopter in his head. I don't know if you remember that paragraph.
Yeah, roughly, but yeah.
So next incident that happened, I went to look after my mom, who's ailing with Alzheimer's, and my sister and her husband are her caregivers until we can find a home for her. And they were in desperate need of a vacation, so when I got there, odd things would happen. Items would be moved around from where they were left. Well, I had a PSW, personal support worker, helping me out. She mentioned she was hearing noises in the house, and when she went to investigate, she couldn't find anything to account for them. And when I got home, I'm obsessive compulsive about some things. I have like 7 cologne bottles I keep on my dresser in the same order, 2 in the back, 3 in the middle, 2 in the front. I woke up one morning and found one out of place. I put it back. The next morning I woke up and these cologne bottles were all strewn all over the dresser. So that stopped and something else started. I have a souvenir that I've had for about 15 years from a fishing trip with my buddies, Lake Temagami in Ontario. I got it about 15 years ago. It's a can of ginger ale with the name Temagami on it. It started making a noise. If you were to flick a can with your fingernail, it was making that noise constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And now that can is somewhat crushed in the middle. It was very bizarre. It just happened in that time period of the fall. One of my friends, one of my fishing buddies, Brent, came to my place to spend the weekend, enjoy the pool, and have a great steak barbecue. He brought with him 2 1 3/4 inch New York strip loin steaks. And my favorite way to, I don't know if you're into barbecuing, but my favorite way to cook big steaks, and I've done this 100 times, is to sear them on the infrared burner for 90 seconds a side. And then what I do is I put it in the oven, stick a thermometer in it, and cook it over indirect low heat. So it usually cooks for an additional hour. The steaks come out great doing it that way. So you can go watch the ball game for an hour and wait for the alarm to go off, and your steaks will be perfect. So I stuck a thermometer in the steak after I finished searing them, and the alarm went off. So I thought it's got to be something wrong with that probe, so I put a brand new one in, and the alarm went off again. And I cut into the steak, and it was absolutely done to perfection, a medium strip loin steak. And I was really glad that my friend Brent was there, because he was a chef. He knew that this was impossible. You can't cook an 1 3/4 inch steak in 180 seconds. It just can't be done. So it was a bizarre incident. So I went to a show with Brent and his wife one day, and I went back to their place for drinks. Lisa, his wife, handed me her phone with a picture of a friend of hers and asked me if I'd be interested in going on a date with her. I can't be picky at my age, so I said sure. So I passed the phone back to her, and I started the 1.5-hour drive home back to where I live. And Lisa called me up all excited. She says, "You're not going to believe what happened. After I left, her phone began to malfunction, and she was locked out of it. And then there was the intercom at their condo buzzed, and it was the police. And they said that they had received a 911 call. There was nobody on the phone call, but they received it and they investigated it. And they asked to see her phone, and there was no phone call showing as outgoing on her phone. And that reminded me very much of something, if you watch the Skinwalker series, happened to one of their, I think he was in charge of security there, Caleb.
Yeah,
and
Caleb Bench.
A very similar thing happened to him, which I found intriguing. Things got a little more serious one day when I was out in my backyard, and I decided to whack some weeds near my back fence line. As I was whacking the weeds, I was suddenly swarmed by hornets and received over 50 bites. I kept my phone in my hand with 911 ready to call, but fortunately I didn't experience any problems. But something about this event seemed a little surreal, so I went back to my book and looked at what I was writing about. And I was writing about Skinwalker Ranch and the transition from Robert Bigelow team to the Fugal team. And I wrote, and I'm quoting out of my book, "A new team of scientists was coming, and they would prove to have the ability to poke the hornet's nest to provoke a response," which is one of Travis Taylor's popular sayings. It was just a very bizarre coincidence. A couple of weeks later, I put on my bug jacket and went to the scene of the crime, brandishing an insecticide spray bomb to exact my revenge, and I couldn't find any sign of the hornet's nest. I'm going to skip over that part because it's still a little fresh about the death of my brother and what he told me. So
no, of course.
I'll just proceed to New Year's Day, 2023. I just dropped off my dinner date, and I was heading home. I decided to take Highway 2 to my town. A few years prior to that, on New Year's Day, I was involved in an accident. A woman lost control of her vehicle on a bend due to black ice, and I managed to avoid her, but she ended up in a farmer's field upside down. And I helped her daughter and her annoying dog that was trying to bite me out of the vehicle, as well as her. Back to present day, I was approaching that same bend, and I reminded him. I actually verbalized it. I said, "Watch what you're doing. This is where you had an accident. This is where it happened." And something out of the corner of my eye on the north side, I saw something big was running at my vehicle. It was black and white and ran like a dog. And what was peculiar about it, it was dusk, but I should have been able to identify it as a dog, but I couldn't. But I was forced to swerve to avoid this dog into the eastbound lane. I pulled onto the shoulder and looked back. There was no dog. Things got a little more serious when I went to visit my daughter. She lives in a military town. Her husband is in the special forces. Her husband actually saw an orb while he was on a training exercise, and they couldn't make it down for Christmas, so I went to visit them and to exchange gifts, and I gave her copy of the book, which was quite a surprise to her. And her husband actually got a little emotional. He was quite affected by the sighting he had, and he said, now I have someone I can talk to about this. So shortly after my visit, they had spotted a UFO one evening in the sky. And as my daughter tells the story, she said she woke up in the middle of the night and she was absolutely paralyzed. She couldn't scream, she couldn't call out. And she felt like something was inside her head. Something was there with her, another entity. And she mentioned that she heard this rhythmic sound in her head. And I suggested, but did it sound like a helicopter blade? And she said yes. So this fortunately went away, but she was terrified. And when her husband was deployed overseas, she moved back with her mom, my ex-wife, because she didn't want to stay in the house. So she stayed there for a month. I felt terrible. I thought perhaps I had brought this upon them with these strange events that were happening around me. To this point, the events had been somewhat innocuous, but that was fairly serious. After this, Andy, things calmed down. My book was done. The noise in my head stopped, as did these strange events. And I was listening to Matt Ford. That's another podcast I watch. And he talked about strange events happened to him when he started his deep dive into the phenomena. He also talked about the Soul Foundation Symposium, which he attended.
Yep.
And they actually talked about how common it was to have high strangeness happen to people that study the phenomena, and that they were concerned that once disclosure happens, these type of events could become commonplace. And that would be problematic, of course. I found an email address for Brandon Fugal, the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, and I sent him a brief description of the events that had manifested while I was just merely writing about the ranch. I really didn't expect to hear back from him. I mean, he's a real estate billionaire, and I didn't expect him to reach out to me, but he did. And he did right away, within 3 hours. And it kind of led me to believe this wasn't the first time he had heard this story, this type of story. And he hooked me up with Eric Bard when I gave him my totally unscientific accounting of what happened, and they called it an interesting data point. So that's my story, Andy. That's what I went through when I was writing this book for my kids.
And thank you very much for sharing that. Fascinating to listen to. And I'll just say, to get a response from Brandon Fugal after 3 hours, it took me about 3 months and probably about 300 emails to him to get him to respond. But yeah, you're right. He's a very busy chap. Very nice, though. And a couple of questions, because we don't have too long. I need to get on to the next call, John. And you've done a wonderful job of summarising everything as well. You mentioned quite early on that the UFO topic, and I suppose you can say the paranormal or any of that kind of esoteric, is filled with, BS and disinformation. How have you navigated that because I think a lot of that can be subjective and depending on the person themselves, what they choose to believe, what they choose not to believe. Personally, how have you kind of navigated that minefield?
Well, I think the best way I can explain it is to use your life skills. I mean, everyone should have a BS meter. And I spent my career in sales and sales management, so I know BS when I hear it. And and I think these days people like yourself can play a role. And I've heard people that call in and ask your opinion on books they should read, and I think you tend to not want to do that, but I think it would be very important. And you do comment when there's a very good book. You somewhat endorse it. And I think that's an important role for people that have well-respected podcasts like yourself to kind of guide people gently into, credible books, credible people, credible podcasts that they can be watching. That would be my advice.
No, that's fair. And do you know what? I think even recently, I don't mean that's fair that I'm great and I should recommend things, but that idea that people should take advice and whatnot, but it's very much, here's what I think, but people have to make up their own mind. I recommended to a listener on the call-in that they had asked me how to get into the subject and what I recommended to watch in terms of documentaries and such. And I said, a lot of people would dismiss Stephen Greer's work or Stephen Greer's documentaries. There's a lot of people who don't like him as much as there are lots of people who do. And I said, you know what? While I'm not particularly a massive fan of his and how he is at the moment, I would say go and watch one of his documentaries and make up your own mind. You have to kind of look at this huge playing field of UFOs yourself and decide, what's the right kind of path for you to take. So, I don't think there's any harm in that, like you say. And yeah, I'll always happily recommend what I think is worthwhile for people. So yeah, completely. Is that fair?
That's fair. And I like Stephen Greer, but his narrative is this phenomenon, non-human intelligence is all warm, fuzzy, and friendly. And I don't necessarily agree with that. He also said something that I think is fairly outrageous. He was talking about abductions, and he said that they're all hoaxed, and it's the military doing it, and that's outrageous. I mean, and that is a concern of mine when disclosure happens. All those people that have been saying they've been abducted through the years are going to put their hand up and say, "See, we told you so." And I just don't know that society is ready to accept that.
No, I agree with you. He's very one-sided in his narrative, and that's where I have an issue with anyone, to be honest. Not that he might be right, he might be wrong, but you've got to keep somewhat of an open mind and see both sides of a strange mystery. I want to ask you one more question, John, just before we wrap up. I'm asking everyone the same question on this call-in. In the year 2024, where we are right now, what would you like to see happen in the UFO topic that you would consider some form of progress?
Well, I would like to see the Schumer-Rounds amendment actually come to fruition in its entirety. I think a 7-year disclosure plan is the most prudent thing to do. I don't think that's going to happen. Listening to Daniel Sheehan, what the plan is, according to him, is to bring witnesses forward. And so it's kind of like ripping the scab off. It's going to be a shock to people. But in his opinion, if they do that enough times, it's going to make people very uncomfortable so that they may actually accept the 7-year disclosure plan. And that's what I'd like to see, is a very careful, thoughtful disclosure to people.
Excellent. I think that would be sensible. And John, I just want to ask, the book isn't for sale, but it is, you mentioned to me, for people who want to read the story and read what you've put down. Did you want me to share that link within the description of the show, or would you rather maybe people got in touch with you?
Maybe rather than have you share it like that, if someone expressed an interest in reading it, just let me know and I'll be happy to share the link with them.
Excellent. And do you want to give an email address or how they could contact you?
Sure, they can contact me at Excellence. That's ECKSELLENCE at yahoo.com. Excellence at yahoo.com.
I was going to say excellent, but John, thank you very much. You've shared that incredibly well, notes and all. Very eloquent, and thank you very much again for sharing your story and experience.
Thank you for your interest, and keep up the great work. You guys do a great job.
Thanks, John. And keeping with the very international theme and flavour of the call-in, we're going to go all the way over to New Zealand, and I've got Ben joining me on the line. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Andy. Thank you for having me on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, mate. Thanks for asking. Listen, we've got a limited amount of time, so let's get straight to it, Ben. The floor is yours. What is it you want to talk about?
So what I wanted to talk about is a couple of experiences that I've had recently. If we had a bit more time, I'd go a bit more in depth and talk about quite a few different experiences, but I do understand that we are limited in time, so I'll just skip to the more recent ones, which involve a couple of triangular craft that I've seen. So just actually a slight bit of background. So in October last year, following watching your interview with Chris Bledsoe, I decided to see if I could make things appear, and turns out that I could. Initially, they were just sort of flashes in the sky, and then a few orb-like things. And then earlier on this year, on the 5th of January, I was out with a friend, and we'd gone to Castle Hill, which is this place in New Zealand that is considered by the Dalai Lama to be the most spiritual place in the universe. And then after that, we went down to one of the local beaches. And when we got there, as soon as we got to the beach, everything felt a little bit strange, well, heightened, should I say. And then got down to the beach, and we could see some orbs sitting on the water. And then we continued walking forward about 10 meters, and then out to the left of us, there was what I initially, my brain said helicopter floating above this orb. And then we just stood there watching it. This would have been about 20 meters away and probably about 10 meters above the water. And then after about 10 seconds, my friend goes, "Don't think that's a helicopter," which I agreed. The biggest telltale sign was there was no sound coming from it at all, or wind. And then, we just continued watching this craft, and then it turned and just flew out over some trees and then landed, looked like it was descending into the trees. Mm-hmm. And my friend, this was at about midnight, so dark outside, my friend determined that it was a triangular shaped craft, although I hadn't been able to pick up on the shape of it myself. So that was the first time with this particular craft. The next night, I was down at another beach and then saw the same thing flying. So the second beach would have been about 20 kilometers north of the first beach they were at. Mm-hmm. So I saw the same craft flying towards the beach that we had been at the night before. I got out my phone and started recording it, and you could see it in the video. And then I said out loud, "Do you want to come closer?" And as soon as I did, the craft disappeared from the recording. However, I could still see it with my own eyes, which was bizarre. I've got no idea what technology they're using to do that. So I continued watching it, and then determined that it had probably gone down about as far as the beach that I'd seen it the night before. So decided to continue up the coastline to another beach, which I then had a feeling that I should go into another one of the beaches where we've got a coastline that's just got beach after beach after beach dotted along it, and drove into this town called Leafield Beach. And then as I got to the township, above my car, about 10 meters up, I saw the triangular craft fly directly over my car, heading out towards the beach. So I then parked and then went out to the beach, and then started a live stream on my YouTube channel. And then after about 10 minutes or so, saw the craft coming back my direction again. So it had gone north and then was coming back had gone south to the original beach and then was coming back my direction. This time it would have been about, 50 plus meters up. It wasn't close anymore. But could quite clearly see the triangular shape of it. And then in the recording, I started to zoom in on it so that you could see it more clearly on the live stream. And on my phone, you could see it perfectly clearly, the triangular shape of the craft.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that on the live stream, as soon as I started zooming in, the quality completely dropped out so that it would just look like a whole pile of blur. And not only that, I was doing a screen recording and then live streaming the screen recording so that I could use my camera rather than the video feature, which means that you could also see all the other icons on my phone. And so it wasn't just the video feed that crapped out with the quality, it was also all the icons.
Okay.
And then once zooming back out again, all the quality increased again. So my assumption is that as soon as I zoomed in, the craft just wiped out the quality, which doesn't surprise me considering the level of quality of videos that we've got of UFOs. It seems that as soon as they're aware that you are recording them or going to get something of good quality, they do whatever they do to make it that you don't. So, yeah. And then lastly, on that night, after finishing my live stream, I drove back to my house. I live about 20 minutes from where that beach is, out in the middle of the country, and got home, put my stuff inside, went back out to my car, and there was two of these craft and just above the trees, just next to my property, just like both of them just sitting there, seemingly observing the property. I watched them for about 5 minutes, and then both of them just went in different directions, doing whatever they do. So yeah, that's my some of my recent experiences.
No, thank you for sharing, and you've put that across well. And listen, first off, do you have the link for the YouTube channel? I'm more than happy to share that on the description for folks to go and check those out themselves, because the first thing people ask is, can I see the video?
Yeah, you can do.
I'll get that off you after we record, and I'll put it in the description. So if anyone's listening to that, wants to go and check those out, you can have a click on the link for that channel. That would be great. Why do you think, I suppose the obvious question that comes to my mind straight away is, why do you think you seem to have so much attention on you from these craft?
Well, so I think it's because I've been putting attention on trying to get them to appear. So after listening to Chris Bledsoe and then Diana Pasolka and listening to how they describe that people who are wanting these things to appear that are open-minded enough to accept that they're probably real, that then they will show up. So I just decided to sort of use a mixture of different methods that people use, but essentially just going outside and saying, hey, if you want to show up, I would be more than happy to see you guys. And so that's what I was doing back in October. And it took weeks for them to show up, but now, more recently, pretty much any night that I do that, something will show up. It seems to be when I'm with other people is when the really incredible stuff happens. I've had a lot of just insane experiences when I'm hanging out with friends, whereas by myself, it seems to be far smaller events, which I'm not entirely certain as to the reason for that, because it seems for most experiences, they have like the crazy stuff happening just to them, and then when they're with their friends, they don't really get to show off anything.
I was literally just thinking that usually you would expect it to be the other way around, and I suppose folks would do, well, of course it's when it's you on your own, it's more, incredible, but you're getting it the other way. So that, what have your friends' reactions been to these?
Pretty mind blown. So the ones who are a bit more open-minded, it's with them that I've had the more insane experiences. I've had a couple of friends who are a little bit on the fence, and we've still seen some pretty cool stuff, but like the triangular craft, that friend is very open-minded. With another friend through an orb that was about the size of the moon, and he's also very open-minded. Whereas other friends who are slightly less well, not open-minded, but maybe a bit more scared of the idea, we'll see a couple of like things in the sky that will flash in response to us. So as to, I do get the feeling with the things that I'm seeing that they're aware of what we're talking about or thinking about, and if they pick up on someone being scared, they don't want to freak them out. If they pick up on someone being skeptical, they'll put themselves out there in a way that a skeptical mind could easily debunk it by going, well, it probably was just a satellite, even if the evidence points the other way. And then if someone's quite open-minded or just is, well, not open-minded, but realizes that there probably is stuff out there, then they're happy to go, yeah, you were right all along. Here we are. So I think that's why when I'm with friends that want to see it, we've got like 2 people keen to see what's going on, and that's when they show up in greater number or with more incredible experiences.
How do you plan on carrying on with this? So right now you've had success in whether you want to call it CE5, human initiated contact, whatever you want to call it. Do you plan on keeping it going? Have you got an idea of where you want to progress this to?
Yeah, absolutely. So my plan is to continue showing people, and eventually, if everything falls into place, go around the world and show anyone that is interested in seeing stuff, well, show them the experience, similar to kind of what Chris Bledsoe is doing, except for he's definitely doing it through the orbs kind of thing, whereas my style is whatever wants to show up can show up. And I think based on that is why I've had such wacky experiences rather than just orbs every night. So that's my plan, is to kind of do a New Zealand tour and then a world tour, and also do live streaming of the craft. I haven't done a live stream in a couple of weeks, just because I've been focusing on some other things in life, which is important to the preparation of being able to fund going and showing people. And so that's my plan with that.
Let me ask you one more question, Ben. I'm asking everyone on the call in the same thing to wrap up. In 2024, what would you like to see happen in the UFO subject that you would consider some form of progress?
Oh, that is a good question. My view is that disclosure will come at an individual level, and government level disclosure will be phenomenal, just to the degree that it will allow people to go out and have their own experience. But I think as far as like the government and legislation goes in US and around the world, it would be great for an acknowledgement so that people are no longer going, no, that's bullshit. And so you can kind of skip the entry level conversation. But as far as full disclosure, I would love for as many people as possible to have their own experience so that they can then know that this is real and then share it with other people, which is exactly what I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, Ben, best of luck with that. It's a very modern approach, I think, to the UFO subject and what's been done in the past. And I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, the idea of live streaming these things might have seemed a bit out there, whereas now it's the most common thing to do. I think it's the new writing a book or starting a magazine for the modern generation. So best of luck, mate. And if you can share that link with me for the YouTube channel, I'll pop it in the description as well for folks to check those out, okay?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Andy. Have a good day.
Thanks, Ben. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked